So, welcome to part 2. Oh, good lord, part 2. Now, if you've seen part 1 of this video, you already know what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about a Japan trip to begin with, because this is why we're doing these videos. There is there is a part 3, potentially, talked about in this video, if you're interested. And it's all to do with ship shape. It's all to do with us going to Japan and us hopefully finding a whole load of naval history. Well, we know there's a whole load of naval history there. Us hopefully being able to record a whole load of naval history to bring to your YouTube viewing, and hopefully encourage more people to go out there and to make it possible for people who can't go out there to experience a little bit of it. We are being joined by Glenn Stewart, and yes, I don't think he knows we use this picture as his second picture. As you can see, those are some of his books. He's published 80 of them. He's going to be our special guest on tour. And the reason he's coming is because, frankly, if you remember correctly, we kidnapped him in Canada. He was our way to get back into Canada when we went to America for the day. We were very worried. We were very worried. We worried that the Americans might not allow the 4 Brit guys out, or the Canadians might not allow the 4 Brit guys in if we didn't have someone there to vouch for us. So we kidnapped a Canadian. He was the friendliest one we found we could fit in the car. And it was a lovely time. And since then, he's come to the UK a couple of times. We've shown him around a few things in the UK. And, well, now we're going to Japan and he's joining us. And it's quite worrying. I think he has reached the level of Stockholm Syndrome, but we'll leave that to one side. This is us. We are off. If you go to the About Us, you can find more about our team. There is Dr. Dan, there's Dan the Chemist, and there is Fleet of the Oceans, who's also there, who you can also learn details about. And look, he's up there. He is very, very happy to have got this. Very, very happy. He's been waiting for this for a while. And again, as said, apologies for the website. It's not as well done as John Bull, aka Garrus the Brit, can do. It's as well done as I, the technician, who had time because, well, my work changed. So I was the one who did it because poor Garrus was very, very busy. So I do apologise. It isn't as well put together as, let's say, if we look at Scandi Ship. This one was very well put together. It had all these lovely things in it. It was really well done. And then we go back to mine, which I've done, which is Japan, and I couldn't even come up with a pun for it. All I did was all ship shape in Yokosuka fashion. I'm sorry, it's all I could come up with at the time, and it seems pretty good, but it's very, very basic. Basically, I shoved in pictures and did some and wrote a load of text and edited and hoped it would be okay for you all. I do apologise. It's not as slick, and for some reason I couldn't even get this to cover all the way down. And you have these options, which is what Garrus managed to do. So I apologise. But I hope it'll do, and I hope you'll enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy part 2 of me and Drac discussing Dreadnoughts that might have been. Hello, and welcome to part 2 of... Well, we were theoretically going to stop with the Washington Naval Treaty, but we might end up wandering past it, because technically this time in part 2, all we've theoretically got left to discuss is the Greek vessel being built by the Germans, which was the full original battlefield hot rod, because it was going to have American guns, British turbines, if I'm not mistaken, Austro-Hungarian sighting system, and it was all being built at a German yard.
Yes.
It was a real, we can go shopping, we have the money, versus the Ottomans, and then there's the Ottoman systems. And we also have some of the German World War One designs, and these always cause fun, mostly because they seem to turn up in various places as being these kind of people claiming they're going to be super ships, and you go, No, they're not going to be super ships. They are good. They could have been quite good ships if they delivered them, but they're not going to be something super or supreme. They are
Okay.
going to be fairly good examples of their period. And then, of course, if we want to feel really cruel, I suppose we could discuss the French designs. We have discussed the Italians. It would be fair to discuss the French. It's
Yeah.
just I always feel bad for our colleague, our new colleague to Shipshape
Mm.
crew, Fleet, whenever we discuss the French designs, because he get he. It always feels like we're picking on him because he defends them so passionately. We're not particularly picking on him.
Well,
It's just
I
he
think
loves the French designs just
yeah.
so much.
Well, the French. I mean, let's just put it this way: the French never do anything normal.
No.
They either design stuff that is absolutely fantastic and beautiful, or stuff that
Yes.
is ugly as sin, and the functionality is roughly proportionate to the level of beauty. And
I have.
unfortunately for them, World War One was not their finest hour in ship design.
I would say the company they are most like to me, to my mind, is Blackburn.
Mm,
They either produce something sublime or they produce something ridiculous, never anything in between. And the
mm,
French design policy, especially since as the legacy of the Junecole was, it was sublime to the ridiculous. If we consider what they're designing at the end of World War One, they
mm.
have some very interesting designs of ships, but you look at them and go, um, are you supposed to be competing with anyone, or are you just building these because you need to build up your own industry
Well,
and
they
then
kind
jump
of got
on?
the idea of how to do pre-dreadnoughts pretty well. I mean, the Dantons for the semi-dreadnought period, the Dantons are really nice,
They are
and
nice.
their last generation pre-dreadnoughts are pretty good. But obviously, that's come out of the awful fleet of experiments at the beginning of the pre-dreadnought period, and then just as they're getting good, um, then the dreadnought race comes along, and
Yeah,
it's like they took all the people who, I mean, obviously they didn't, but it's almost as if they'd taken all the people who designed their last generations of pre-dreadnoughts and guillotined them all because I mean the to be fair, the Corbett's are okay. Um, as first generation dreadnoughts go, the problem is they're not built in the first generation of dreadnoughts. They're built far later. And they're kind of serviceable, but they have the weakness that pretty much all the French actual and paper designs have of that period, which is that of all the major navies, the French are convinced that battle ranges are going to be the shortest. So you end up with ships that physically can't engage much beyond 12, 13,000 yards in some cases, simply because the guns won't elevate high enough. And I mean, the Germans have it bad enough when they're facing off against the British, because the British have greater gun elevation than them, but the French are even worse. And then you have the Britannias, and again, kind of as super dreadnoughts, the Britannias, at least on their in paper stats, aren't awful. Well, they don't look particularly nice because the French have verged off into their ugly phase again. Um, but again, they're kind of if the if they'd been contemporary with the Orions, you would have gone creditable effort, but they're not.
no, they're constantly a generation behind. It's you look at them and they are
Mm,
constantly a generation behind everyone else, and
mm,
it's not helped to my mind that their ships are generally getting more and more complicated. And then you start looking at the Normandies which come afterwards, and
mm,
someone has a bright idea of let's use both triple expansion and turbines.
mm. Well, this is the problem. It's like it's still in some ways the legacy of the Genève. Their infrastructure just isn't there. It's what starts off in the pre-dreadnought period. They've skipped essentially a generation of battleship construction. They don't have the yards to support the newer, bigger ships, and so they're forced to design ships where one of the
But
major constraints is can we actually build this on our existing slipways and can we fit this in our existing dry docks?
you
And the
say that,
answer
but
very much is usually no. And so you get sort of size constraints on the pre-dreadnoughts. Then they expand the infrastructure to cope with what they really
yeah,
should have had. And that's when you get like the good French pre-dreadnoughts towards the end, because now they have the shipyard capacity to actually design the ship that the Marine Nationale needs. And then the dreadnoughts come along and it's like, oh, great, we're back to square one again. And when they're looking at the successes for the Britannias, I mean, to be fair to them, they do look into getting 15-inch guns or something of a, they look at various guns in that rough caliber range. But then they realize, well, if we build ships with, eight 15-inch guns or more, that we're going to be back in the realm of we can't fit these in our yards. So, and it's going to be obviously also expensive to develop a whole new weapon, because unlike the British, who have built what, Lion, Queen Mary, Princess Royal, four classes of four super dreadnoughts, and stuck them on um, Almirante Torre, and they're going to put them on Almirante Cochrane. So they've got a pretty good production run out of the 13.5. The French have done their 13.4 for the Britannias, and only the Britannias. So they've gone 12-inch on the core base, 13.4 on the Britannias. Now they're looking at having to go up again after producing
Well,
just a few dozen guns, and they decide it's just not viable economically. I mean, to be fair, they do have a massive army to fund as well, because they've got Germany kicking down the front door. But you end up with the Normandies, which is essentially kind of will match the firepower of the new 15-inch gun, and I suppose American 14-inch gunships, by just putting more 13.4s. So they invent the quad
I,
turret.
I, I could concede to all that.
Mm,
13.4 is not. I can never understand why they didn't have a 350 millimeter gun. Why they're
mm.
going for a 13.4. I realize there's historical precedence, etc. But if you think of it, they're going, we're working in millimeters now. Surely 350 would have made more sense than 340. But leaving that to one side, the core base have turbines. Not very good turbines, but they have turbines. The Britannics have turbines, which are better turbines. And then the Normandies, yeah, let's give them triple expansion engines because that'll increase their efficiency. No, just no. What?
I
No,
mean,
you're.
the Americans are experimenting with the idea of VTEs as efficient, long range efficient engines as well. But firstly, France's primary naval threat is right next door. They don't really need to go very far to find it. And secondly, as much as you might criticize some of the American decisions for reverting to vertical triple expansion engines, at least they went, this ship has VTEs, this ship has turbines, not this ship has half and half. And now our engineering
Yeah.
crews need to know how to operate both sets of machinery. Um,
And now we need to like design the hull space for it as well, and the hull
yeah,
configuration armoring, because you have to consider the height of a vertical triple expansion engine in the hull.
which is one of the main reasons so many of the early the early dreadnoughts have wing turrets, or that weird
And
spaced out layout that you get with the Gangers.
yeah, and then they continue the idea of the Leon class,
Mm.
and just
Which
sit
is
there and
essentially
go,
just a Normandy with a hull section, so you can have a fourth gun turret in.
yes.
And
And you
then
sit there and
there's a battle cruiser, which is essentially, hey, we took a Leon class and we reverted back to the Normandy armament and stuck some more machinery in.
I
Um,
know. It's
I
a
mean,
case of
the thing is, I can kind of
why?
forgive some of the Normandy decision, because the Normandy, in some ways, the Normandy you could almost argue is a budget version of the same idea that the US was pursuing when, when the US Navy was told, no, you can't have the 16-inch gun. They just went, right, we'll go for a dozen 14-inch instead.
Mm.
Whereas obviously Britain and Germany are moving on to 815s. And to a certain degree, you could almost see like, okay, well, the French are going for a dozen 13.4s. That kind of makes sense as a budgetary concern. But
And
then
then like,
once you get to the Leons, and it's like, okay, we're just going to have 16 of these guns. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but by the time you're designing the Leons, the level of protection, let alone the level of firepower that their contemporaries are going to be wielding when their contemporaries are going to be designed to cope with 14, 15, possibly 16-inch guns, the 13.4 just doesn't cut it anymore. Because I mean, it's the whole thing. Like,
It's
you've probably got the same kind of question on your channel as like, is it better to have more smaller guns or fewer bigger guns? And my usual response is, if your gun can reasonably penetrate the enemy's protection at normal battle ranges, stick with that and have more because you get more opportunities to hit. If you can't do that, you need a bigger gun, which is fine as a general rule. But when it's a case of, well, actually now most of the enemy ships are going to be able to resist 13.4-inch fire at normal battle ranges, having more of them doesn't help. It,
That's usually my answer because usually it also comes back to when I go, well, this is why I usually when people ask me what's the best caliber for a battleship gun, I
mm,
go 16.5 inch
mm,
because you get the highest rate of fire you can have for the largest gun. Everything after that point, the rate of fire starts to drop off dramatically. It's got just a bit more penetration than a 16 inch. You can do a 16.5 inch super heavy if you really want, and you might as well go with it. You might as well go with that.
mm,
But once you're getting beyond 16.5 inch, you start losing your rate of fire, and especially when you've got visual fire control, and you need in some ways your fire to allow you to work out where your opponent is and to range in on them.
mm.
That actually starts to work against you. And it's better, therefore, to actually just have more of the 16.5 inch guns because you can give them a pretty good range. They can There isn't much that's going to be able to withstand a 16.5 inch. If you design something to withstand a 16.5 inch shell from penetrating, you basically have got a floating block of armor,
Yeah. But I mean, I think when it comes to the
which,
French designs, they're kind of they're reflective of the fundamental problem that both France and Germany have and have had for pretty much their entire existence, which is that they are ultimately European land powers. The
yes.
Navy is ancillary to them. The real difference is that Germany had built up a fairly powerful army, then thanks to the Kaiser and Tirpitz, had kind of taken a little bit of a diversion with an existing powerful army and gone, right, we're going to build a bunch of naval infrastructure with our big surging economy and build a navy. But even for them, eventually the army turned around and said, no, 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 we want our money back now. And the French are basically
Yeah.
trying to do the same thing, but they don't have the budget and they don't have the infrastructure because the French economy, relative to everybody else's economy, is not what it was in the 1860s or the 1800s. They're no longer Europe's largest economy. They can't afford to maintain a very large land army that's constantly keeping up with modern technology and a very large navy. And ultimately, the French battleship their dreadnought designs of World War One kind of just reflect that. Um, I mean, it's even with a dry dock I was recording yesterday. I think someone asked like, when did the Germans actually lose Jutland? And I basically said, well, because their argument was, well, when the Germans failed to continue building the Baden class, they just built Baden and Bayern and not Sachsen and Württemberg. And I said, actually, really, the Germans lost Jutland in 1912 because the Koenigs, it's like the Koenigs versus the early British super dreadnoughts, the Orions and the King George V. You can make arguments either way. The Koenigs have slightly heavier armor but less firepower. But the thing is, the Germans, they build for the four Koenigs. Great, fine. The British build a dozen 13.5-inch super dreadnoughts. And then the British start building the Queen Elizabeths. And then they start building the R's. And it's only when the last of the Queen Elizabeths and the sort of the second and third R class are being laid down that the Germans lay down two Bardens, Baden and Bayern, because they've got this sort of
Mm.
two and a bit year break where the army's just gone, no, we're having the budget back, thank you.
And
That's
it
when you,
gets worse when you start getting the questions. People go, "Well, the Bardens." People will say the Bardens Rankian equivalent to the Queen Elizabeth, and I go, "No, no, no. The Bardens in many ways are a response to the R's.
mm,
They can contend with the R's. A Barden does not want to be in a one-on-one fight with Queen Elizabeth
yeah.
because that thing will have the speed. It can move. It can dictate things like range and
Well,
engagement.
and also like time wise, the first Bardens are contemporary with the R's. The Queen
Yeah.
Elizabeths are the previous year's battleships, but by the point you get to the Germans laying down the Bardens, Germany has essentially given the British an 8 to 12 ship lead uncontested
Hmm.
in battleship construction. And even if you said, "Oh no, the Bardens can one v one any of the British 15-inch ships," it's like, great. Well, you're building two. The British end up building 10, and they were planning on building 13. um, so
Well,
yeah,
it's
that.
like I often explain people when I talk about the Anglo-German naval race and it being
Mm,
a quantitative race, and I'm talking about that, I go, you have to remember if the Royal Navy had built two dreadnoughts, as is their normal practice when they're doing a test bed ship, and should have been their normal practice to build four in a year anyway, and
mm,
then they built four battleships for the next for the Bellefonte class and four for the St. Vincent class, they'd have had 10 in service. Add another four on that, you'd have had 16 12-inch gun,
mm,
12-inch battleships. If you consider how many the Germans built in that time period in comparison numbers, no one would have ever believed the Germans were in any way, shape, or form in a quantitative race with the Royal Navy.
yeah, and
It would have
that's
been
and
a
that's
bit of a
that's
joke.
at the same time that the British are doing the historical naval arms race, they're also building the Minas Gerais class. They're building, well, what's
Yeah.
originally Rio de Janeiro, later Sultan Osman the First Evil, then Agincourt. They're also building Almirante Littorio, Almirante Cochrane, and despite all of those export battleship orders, there are still British yards going, "We would like some orders, please, because we don't have enough."
There are literal yards closing down. Thames
Mm,
Ironworks is a good example. Literal yards which build. Thames Ironworks builds an Orion class, and they close down through lack of work. When you start to realize that, you sort of go, the British superpower in the 1900s, technology wise, was
mm,
infrastructure and sheer quantity. And the
yeah.
problem they had, the Achilles heel, that was the government, and they're occasionally deciding they wouldn't. Because literally, it's the early Liberal government which then gets in the panic and does a lot of naval race
Mm.
building construction, which is going, we're going to save money by only building three battleships or only building one dreadnought. I sit there and go, if you had literally built two dreadnoughts, which wouldn't have cost you more, a second dreadnought would not have cost you a lot more money. What is You'd have probably found yourself you would never have been in a qualitative
Mm.
race with Germans. The Germans would have just folded into probably the not never into the quantitative race. They'd have all been part of the qualitative race, the quality race.
Mm.
And let's be honest, the quality race doesn't have anywhere near the heat the quantitative race does.
Well, yeah,
It just doesn't.
and at the same time, you still have, even in a qualitative race, you have the fact that the Royal Navy is actually building relatively conservatively. They kind of back
Mm,
away from the triple turret. They, amazingly enough, actually back away from heavy guns a little bit, because they could have had the 13.5s on the St. Vincent's, and they went, no, 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 we're going
yeah.
to go a bit conservative with the 12-inch 50s. And at the time that the 15-inch gun is being developed, private enterprise, Vickers, Armstrong, all that lot, they're already marketing a 16-inch gun to the
Well,
Brazilians. Um,
you
and
you and I are. I think no, as we've already discussed
mm,
in the previous video about Agincourt, neither of us disagrees that the British were working on an 18-inch and bigger guns. In fact, the
mm,
Navy were working on them. The only disagreement you and I have is whether the Agincourt was being
yeah,
designed for them or not on the triple turret.
yeah.
And
But the thing is,
that's the
Britain
thing.
has the naval industry that at that point is so expansive. You have, okay, the private industry has given up building full capital ships on speculation, but they're still building full scale battleship guns essentially on speculation that they can either sell them to the Royal Navy or sell them to somebody. Whereas
Mm.
in Germany, it's like, no, thou shalt have Krupp guns, and thou shalt like this. And Krupp and the German naval establishment is actually playing things fairly conservatively, because when the British are well into their stride of building 13.5-inch ships, the Germans are still building 12-inch ships, and they end up having to skip straight to the 15-inch. But that's even, that's a year or two after the Queen Elizabeths have been laid down. But I guess that brings us on to the German World War One designs. In the,
Yeah.
yeah, people look at them, the L-20A alphas, E alphas, and all the other various sketch designs, which some of which World of Warships have brought in now. And you kind of look at them and go, yeah, okay. Between that and the Ersatz Yorks and the Mackinsons, the Germans have some fairly solid designs there. Um, and yes, if you compare L-20 Alpha with the Queen Elizabeth, it seems to have a number of advantages. But what people miss is that the Queen Elizabeths are not the contemporaries. As we said, they're not even the contemporaries of the Bardens and the Bayerns. That's the R's, which are
No.
the successors. The Germans have come up with these paper designs in the middle of the war and toward the end of the war, and there's no chance of them ever getting built. And even if they laid them down, they would never stand a chance of completing them. I mean, the Germans were fairly enthusiastic about completing the Mackensons, which are actually near enough a full pre-war design, and they don't even get them done. I mean, they even cancel Saxon and Württemberg, which, admittedly, okay, they're laid down pretty much during the war, but they are basically Baden Redux.
Mhm.
And so it's like, well, even if they laid them down, the war would have had to go on to like 1920, 1921 for them to ever see service. But you're talking about ships whose design period is what? I mean, the Queen Elizabeths are laid down in 1912, 1913, so their design freeze 1911, early 1912. These ships that the Germans are looking at, you're talking about 1916, 1917 design period. That's like 4 to 5 years further on in
The,
in capital ship design, and the British, for the most part, haven't been designing full-scale battleships in the aftermath of the war starting because the government has told them they can't. But
no. You are not nice as
mm,
well. I'm not gonna because you have suspicions. I know, and I don't
well,
have
that's why I said
suspicions.
for the
I full on
most
suspect.
part.
You say for the most part, there have been design studies going on.
Yes,
There has been an ongoing design process in
they they've been they've
nicest
been
way.
ticking over the iterative nature of designs, but they haven't been producing like the sheer quantity of like every year here's four different designs to choose from that they
In
were doing
an,
pre-war.
I would say iterative is doing a lot of work there to claim some of those designs
Mm,
are just iterative. But it's like I'm fairly certain if the Germans had actually been pushing and looking like they would actually get an L-20 or something like that into the
mm,
water, then in the nicest way, the British would have turned around and would have responded with probably four whatever their latest
mm,
design was just being built.
yeah.
And
Well, you've
it's
got
a
to
case of
remember.
okay, this is going to be a 26 knot battleship, right? Then we need a 28 knot battleship.
Well, you've got to
And
remember
yeah,
the difference in time period between a lot of these German designs, paper designs, and we'll use the Queen Elizabeth as our benchmark.
mm,
That's the same time difference as the designs for the St. Vincent versus the Queen Elizabeths.
yeah.
It's like, if the Germans start building some of these things, as you said, the British are going to be dusting off whatever is currently ticking over in the background as their designs, and I mean, heck, even if we just use the Queen Elizabeth as an example, they could just go, okay, fine, Jellicoe, you can have your way. We're just going to build some repeat QEs, but with small tube boilers. Boom, instant 28 knot, 15-inch gun super dreadnought. Minimal work needs to be done. Or they could go to the 10 gun, Iron Duke on steroids design that was competing for the Queen Elizabeth. So 10, 15-inch guns. Now,
Which
admittedly,
can also do 28 knots.
well, yeah,
The
that's
small
that's
triple,
a
yeah.
that's a 22 knot design, I think, originally, because it's supposed to be the slow version.
It
But you
it's
stick the small tube boilers in,
yeah.
you're going to push it to 25, 26 knots already. And that's assuming you do no work on the whole form design. You do no work accounting for new machinery apart from the boilers, because obviously the turbines and the geared turbine sets and everything are improving. And that's also assuming you keep the armament the same, because you've got 16, 16.5, 18-inch guns on the drawing board by 1916, 1917. So if you say took that 10 gun QE design and said, right, that with small tube boilers, but also let's say for as a conservative estimate, they're going to say, oh, we're going to upgrade it to 16-inch guns. Well, you're going to need extra length for that. Not a huge amount more beam, so your length to beam ratio goes up. So yeah, suddenly boom, 27, 28 knot, 10, 16-inch gun ship with 13, 14 inches of armor. That's an L-20 E Alpha killer. Um,
Yeah, the thing is it's Probably at that point because they're still
Mm,
very much in there. And you always have. I always look at the G3s. Are going. The
mm,
original one's going to be 16 and a half, and they drop it down to 16 because they think
mm.
that will get them through the treaties. Because they think it's going to be a gun limitation. They don't think it's going to be a tonnage
Yeah.
limitation. So
Well,
that's their idea to get the G3.
and it's also about just squeezing those designs just about into a few more dockyards.
Yeah,
It is very funny. I think when I went to Gibraltar and those dry docks are still there, and you take a photo of them, and you're just like, that thing is basically what kills the 16.5-inch battle cruiser design that the Royal Navy wants in the aftermath of World War One, because they're literally shaving feet here and there, and they're like, if we give it 16-inch guns, we can shave just enough off the length that it can fit in Gibraltar and a few of the other overseas dry docks. Otherwise, we're stuck dry docking them only in the
but
UK.
the thing is, in the middle of a World War One scenario, when they're built in wartime, if they were
Mm,
doing that and they were dealing with
mm,
the L-20s, they probably do go for the 16.5-inch gun because it's further along in development
mm.
cycle. Because it was remember the 16.5-inch gun was almost selected over the 15-inch for the Queen
Yeah,
Elizabeths, and
and
that's
if they
always the
want
fun.
the speed, if they've
Yeah,
taken the 10 gun design that we just described as their baseline, and they go, okay, we want 16.5-inch, someone's just going to go, okay, right, well, we'll have 16.5-inch instead of 10. And hey, if we've eliminated a turret, we've got most of that length back. Hey, that's more machinery space.
and you're
So
going to
now you're
find
definitely
yourself
hitting
dealing with
28 knots, if not more.
a
Yeah.
30 knot fast battleship. At which point the L-20 is. And honestly, this is the thing when we talking about this. People sometimes go, "Oh, you guys are having flights of fantasy." No, this is us being very
Mm,
conservative with what the Royal Navy could do
yeah.
at the time, because this is stuff that's sitting in British industry. This is the equivalent of them walking down to the Navy equivalent of B&Q and buying what's off the shelf.
Mm.
I'm
I
trying to
mean,
think of what the American equivalent of B&Q is, because
Lowe's, I think.
Lowe's, yeah,
Yeah.
they're walking down to that kind of store. Do you remember what the Australian place was? We did go in one, didn't we? When we were in Australia at one point.
I think you did. I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, what was it called? Because I remember I was taken in there
Mm.
because we were wandering around and we were. It was where they were serving. They had good sausages as well. It
Yeah,
was
that was
really weird. It
definitely
was a
when you
B.
were away.
It was a B and Q which also had a
Mm.
butchery in it, and I was just going. This is the most Australian thing known to mankind because you have your B and Q, your sort of your household working section, and
Mm.
then you had your barbecue section, and then where you had where you could buy your meat for your barbecue. And I was just going, "This is Australia in a
Well,
store."
you can buy the wood to build the deck, you can buy the barbecue to put on the deck, and you can buy the meat to put on the barbecue. It's perfect.
Yes, it was brilliant.
A
It was one
one-stop
stop shop
shop.
for my evening entertainment.
Mm. But yeah, when I look at those kinds of designs, I mean, again, I think people forget sometimes that when you're looking at, say, Hood, everyone thinks of Hood as a post-war ship. Her design is complete before Jutland. She's
Yeah.
under construction before Jutland. Now, admittedly, post Jutland, um, they do kind of ramp up the armor and make various design changes, but they're already making those even before Jutland to a certain extent. But Hood, 31, 32 knots, roughly speaking, 15-inch guns, and armor protection to match a QE. That is British capital ship design circa late 1915, early 1916. And that's with compromises because she's evolved from an original idea for a shallow draft QE. And she's a battle cruiser.
Hmm.
Advance that by a year, give them time to, work on some of those designs. I mean, heck, to be honest, forget taking the 10 gun QE and working through that. You could quite literally take some of the draft designs that were put in for Hood before they settled on the one that they did and just go, okay, we're building the Admiral class battle cruisers for our battleship. We're just going to go, okay, Hood, except with more armor. Okay, so we're dropping down to maybe around 30 knots. And well, we'll swap out the twin 15s for twin 16.5s. That's going to impinge slightly on the machinery space, drop us down to 28 knots. Okay, fine. Well, guess what? Now we've got an angled armor, probably 15-inch belt armored, 16.5-inch ship that's 28 knots. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that would be trivially easy to design in 1916. which, okay, yeah,
Basically, you've got to increase the subdivision, you've got to increase
mm,
some of the ribbing and some of the structure inside it to support all that extra army, but you can
yeah,
do that. It's not going to be. It's going to sound strange again. For the naval architects involved in the
mm,
constructor's office of the Royal Navy, that's not going to be a challenge. That's not
no,
something which is going to be sending them off to hide under a tree waiting for an apple to fall on their heads. They're just going to go
yeah.
to the design boards.
And the thing is, it's like it doesn't. None of this diminishes what those German designs are. The German designs are
No,
functional. Yeah, a lot of them are actually pretty good. They would represent the approximate sort of to plus or minus half a generation cutting edge of naval design in 1916, 1917. But it's also not anything that the British can't match. And given that Germany's the one that's under blockade and is fighting a gargantuan land war at that point against three different armies, um, well, three different major armies plus a bunch of small ones, it's like of the two, the nation that's in the place to actually do anything about this and evolve its naval design further is not Germany. You know,
no.
they're essentially designed. They would be designing and building on something of a shoestring, albeit with a fairly advanced technical base. And the British would just be going, okay, cool, we'll match and exceed that. In some ways, would probably you're almost looking at a similar kind of situation to what you get in the 1860s with the ironclad race. You know, the French can turn out creditable ironclads. Maybe they start off half a generation behind, like the Germans did with the Nassau's, but they can turn out creditable ships. They just can't turn out enough of them, and the British always have that ace in their pocket, thanks to the multiplicity of armament and shipbuilding industries of just being able to go, okay, but we can just adopt this that somebody's developed to go plus one.
And speaking about that, that actually leads me to quite an interesting idea because this is a design point I've put forward and occasionally consider things.
Mm,
The British with the G3s and N3s,
mm,
people have said, oh, they're looking for a warrior moment or a dreadnought moment. I don't think so. I think they're looking for an Admiral class ironclad moment. Because you have to remember the Admiral class were the F-22, for want of a better description of their
mm,
day. They were the frigate around and frigate find out.
mm.
If you caused trouble for the Royal for Britain, one of them would turn up, and everyone was going, "Well, whilst we think we could possibly fight you, we'll try and find that out another day. We've got something busy to do now, so we'll leave."
Mm.
And that's something which the Royal Navy really needed to recapture. And the whole way through the dreadnought building process, and especially prior to World War One, they're not really getting that. Because
Mm.
to an extent, they're almost being too conservative to get that. They're looking for it, not getting it. But then you look at the
Well, I think
G3s and
this
the
is.
N3 designs, you look at that whole design lineage, and
Mm.
you look at some of those ships in there, and you go, you are trying to build the frigate around and find out ship, aren't you?
Yeah, I think this is the thing that you know people generally, when you look at the Washington Treaty ships, you're looking at Amagi and Tosa, Lexington and South Dakota, and G3 and N3, and everyone goes, okay, so this is everybody's equivalents. And he's like, no, the Lexingtons are really pushing the boat out as far as American battle cruiser design is concerned. And the Americans are investing in the extra infrastructure. I mean, it's like,
Hmm.
was it last year when I was at New Jersey, USS New Jersey for her dry docking? The dry dock in Philadelphia Dockyard that she went into, the reason it can fit the Iowa class is because it was originally built as part of the effort for the Lexington class when someone turned around and said, yes, it's all very well building a nearly 1,000 foot long battle cruiser. We don't have 1,000 foot long dry dock. And I went, okay, we'll build a 1,000 foot long dry dock. So they were
Yeah.
building the infrastructure to support their designs. Um, whereas the British were going, okay, we have, you know, K3, L3, M3. Um, but we could build these, and it's not even that they don't have the infrastructure. They could build them. They have the dry docks that can maintain them, but they don't have many of them. And they're not willing to spend the money to upgrade all the other dry docks across the empire to support them. And so they have to start cutting them down. Because, yeah, the N3 is scary. It's like 9 18-inch guns. You know, it's almost that floating brick of armor you mentioned earlier,
Oh, yes.
massively thick belt and inclined. And it's really
And
the
it's got
baby.
subdivision up the
Yeah.
wazoo. The thing is basically, oh, a shell has penetrated
Mm.
me. Where's it got through? About a
somewhere.
couple of
Yeah.
rooms.
But the thing
Oh,
is, at the end of the day, it's the baby of the family.
oh
You
yes.
look at some of its predecessor designs. Some of its predecessor designs carried just as many guns, as much, if not more, armor, and were moving a heck of a lot faster. And the same thing, the G3s, yeah, 9 16-inch guns, Iowa scale or better protection. Iowa like speed, maybe a little bit slower than the Iowas, um, depending on which speed estimates you believe. But again, as you say, they're the babies. They're originally supposed to have 16.5-inch guns, and then the predecessor to that design, the British spend who knows how long desperately trying to figure out how to fit 18-inch guns on a battle cruiser. And it's
Oh
only
yeah.
when they realize that you can't really do that with 9 guns and fit the existing infrastructure across the globe. They're like, I think they work out at one point you can get 6 18-inch guns on, but they decide that's too few. But if the British had gone with the way the Americans were going with the Lexingtons, are going, we will build the infrastructure to match our design um, ideas. The G3s and the N3s would have looked like child's play. As you said, they're pretty much, they start off with the ambition of like, these are statement ships of kind of, don't try and start another one of these stupid naval arms races because you will lose. It's like, we might not be able to build quite as many under the current government budget constraints. Although, as I point out to a lot of people, Britain is described as broke in the early 1920s. And it's like, Britain had a lot of debt. Britain was paying down that debt pretty quickly. Given that our current government situation, where we're ostensibly not supposed to be broke, but our national debt is going, and somehow 1920s Britain is broke when their national debt is going down. It's like, no, Britain had more
Yeah.
than enough financial capacity to pay for these things if the government had the backbone to pay for them. But the Royal Navy, kind of sensing that that wasn't going to happen, initially had just kind of gone with, yeah, okay, stop playing at the big boys table. We can and will completely outbuild you quality wise, and we'll still build quite a few of them anyway. And then you think, well, and that's where they would have started, and things gone on. But the
Well,
N3s and the N3s and the G3s, for all that they are superb designs, they are the budget version of the budget version.
well, if you really want the scary ones, and this is what I usually tell people, if you want to see scary, you look up the L3 and K3 designs, and then you imagine the world if the Royal Navy builds those
Hmm.
and actually gets them completed. We're talking roughly 50,000 tons in normal displacement. We're talking each of them carrying 9 18-inch guns. And, well, let's put it this way. The battle cruiser variant of the K3 was supposed to do 30 knots. The L3, which is the battleship variant, was just it's a smaller vessel. Okay, it's not so as powerful. It's only supposed to do 25 knots. But then you look at it and you go, yes, it's supposed to do 25 knots, but how thick is that armor? Oh, the armor. Just to say this is 15 inches thick at 25 degrees angle for the main belt. It's got an upper belt of 9 inches thick at an angle of 65 degrees. It's got 8-inch thick deck armor, and then it's got further armor around it to provide protection inside. And you sit there and go, it's got. Here's the thing that always makes me have the most on this. The front plate on the turrets, both of them, is 18 inches thick. Yamato class. People make a big fuss about them being 18 inches thick and this being something really amazing. It's not. There are, and it's not just the British are looking about 18-inch thick plates in this period. Lots of nations are looking at them. But the thing is, the British are going, oh yeah, we can design it, and it's treated completely as normally because they do have the presses, they do have the facilities which can do 18 inches thick armor, and they do have people like Vickers which have done experiments with 18-inch thick armor plates and have already been working on it for a few years. It's it's scary once you start looking at them because you're going, okay, so if the treaties hold off and the British go even a slightly different route from the G3 N3 route, then the ships the Royal Navy's going to have and going to be left with by any, let's say, 1925 treaty, because I do think there would have been a treaty at some point in the 20s,
Hmm.
are going to be in a very different situation than they were in 1920. Even if you don't have those treaties, if you have the G3 and the N3 built, they are in a very different situation by 1925. And there's going to be a fair number of people who are going to be in a very different situation in the 1930s because of that. Because it's the thing about Britain in this period that has to be understood is they have been building and investing so much in naval infrastructure for so long that they can afford to lose it and still
Hmm.
everyone else has to build up to compete with them.
Yeah, I mean,
America has a lot of potential. America can become massive, but America hasn't had the ongoing investment.
in a lot of ways, you know the British capacity for naval construction in the late 1900s and 1910s is essentially it's the battleship, it's the gun-based navy version of what the US would become in World War II.
Mhm.
Like the only thing that's restricting Britain realistically when it comes to naval construction is not can Britain afford it or does it have the infrastructure? It's will the Treasury shake loose the money? It's not that the Treasury doesn't have the money. It's just whether or not they can be persuaded to spend it on that particular thing. Um, by the time you get to the World War II, it's a completely different kettle of fish, but that's largely because the Treasury are the nearest thing that you can get to a codified bunch of traitors in British government. As I mentioned in a dry dock recently, you have that whole stupidity in the recession, the Great Depression, in the early 30s of instead of going, okay, we need to preserve our naval infrastructure, both to build up the Royal Navy and potentially capture the export market later on. So we should spend some money now to tide over our infrastructure. Instead, the government has an entire department backed by the Treasury, which is going around buying up places like Palmer's and everything. The Jarrow Shipyard, the whole Jarrow March is the
Mm.
direct result of this. And not only are they buying up naval construction and armament companies, they're then deliberately shutting them down, deliberately selling off the heavy plant and the infrastructure, and deliberately putting legally binding covenants on them that say these yards cannot and will not be used for naval construction purposes for at least 30, 40, 50 years. And it's like, there's this whole thing of like, if you were an enemy agent trying to destroy British naval supremacy, what more could you possibly have done at that
The fact is,
stage?
they don't stop doing that till
They're still doing it in
1938.
1938. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
this.
and I was sitting there, you and I both had the same thing going through this. They're still doing this in 1938. The 10-year rule ends in 1932. They actually let them start having pro funding in 1937, and they're still shutting it down. And half the reason why the Royal Navy can't build the stuff it needs to build in the 1930s is because the infrastructure's been forcibly shut down and sold off by the
Yeah,
Treasury.
and even when in the middle of rearmament, it's like you would think national emergency would be the point at which you could turn around and say, okay, yes, we signed these legally binding covenants for peacetime, but this is a national emergency. This is wartime. We are rescinding them for the purposes of wartime, and they still won't do it. And
They
then you
couldn't
you
even
end up
rescind
with
them
these
during the war.
yeah, we do end
They
up with
couldn't.
these dumb situations where it's like, by the middle of World War II, you've got a choice of do we complete Vanguard or do we complete Implacable? Well, we don't have, we've got the slipways just for both of them, but we no longer have the skilled workforce to do both. And then you have to make a choice. They end up choosing to complete the carrier first. Whereas if you'd just gone, okay, look, we're just going to put everybody essentially like they put everyone on half pay to use a naval term and preserve the shipyards, you would have had the manpower and the infrastructure to be able to complete Vanguard, Implacable, and half a dozen sister ships of both. But never let long-term thinking get in the way of the treasury and saving 2 shillings and sixpence right this instant.
They know, and the thing is, you deal with this a lot. Is they know the price of everything, the value of nothing.
Mm,
And the price they know of it is what is it valuable for at this moment. They don't think what could be valuable for the next few years. What does the 20, 30 year, 40 year?
yeah. We
In
can sell off all
Yeah.
this useless cranes and pumps and everything, and we can make £250,000 now. And never mind the fact that in 2 years' time, that yard will be probably turning over that much in tax revenue every 6 months. But that's not now.
No. It's not now. But with that being said,
Hmm.
the British do have fun with their designs, and then of course there is
Hmm.
the favourite of you and my for Washington the Washington
Hmm.
treaties to debate, which is should the Royal Navy have gone F3 or should they have gone with Nelson and Rodney?
Yeah, you see, I personally, much as I absolutely love the Nelson design, the more and more I look into it, the more and more convinced I've become that the Nelsons are unfortunately just a little bit of a prestige unit more than anything else. Because the
Ah,
Japanese are building the Nagatos with 16-inch guns, 16.1. The Americans are building the Colorados with 16-inch guns. And somewhere along the line, somebody has gone, hang on a minute, we don't have a 16-inch gunship, therefore we need one.
you
Um,
see, mine is it comes with that phrase which Churchill and others used all their free lives: the unsinkable bulwarks of the British naval line. And you sit there and go, A, naval fighting is not like that. B, naval fighting is not like that. And C, no, just no. And it's the imagery they're wrapped up in. I've been a fan of the F3 for about as long as
mm,
they're going to be, because as much as I do like the Narrows, I do think they're plucky ships. They have great history, great
mm,
story. I don't go, look, you almost had a what was pretty, would have been another fully
mm.
armored battle cruiser in terms of the F3. It would have been a fully armored battle cruiser.
And it
It's
would have
not a
had a new
battleship.
15-inch gun design, which could have been
Yes,
retrofitted to the rest of the fleet. Because that's the
which would
thing
have given
that
all.
the,
Yeah,
the Washington Treaty says you cannot increase the caliber of your ships. You can't take a 15-inch ship with 16-inch guns in. It says nothing about putting another gun of the same caliber in.
no,
I
it
mean,
doesn't.
in actual fact, the Americans do exactly that.
Hmm.
The 14-inch guns that are on most of the standards going into World War II, they're like Mark 7, Mark 8, Mark 10 units. They're they're not entirely new, but they're radically different in capabilities to the Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4, Mark 5, etc., that are on exactly the same ships in World War One. So the British going, well, yes, we've got our 15-inch 42, but we've now invented the 15-inch 45, or maybe even the 15-inch 50, and we're
Which
just
was
going
what
to
was going on which was
standardize
what was the
across the
F3
fleet
design.
that I mean, the other thing is as well, the British get the concession to build Nelson and Rodney because essentially they argue that, well, you've got 16-inch gunships and we don't. I as well as thinking, well, the F3s would probably be net more useful going forward anyway, and certainly the way the timeline actually worked out.
Mm.
The other thing I've always, well, not always, but I think for a good 4 or 5 months thought about is that, again, much as I love the Renowns, if you look at the British battle line, especially if you're going with F3s instead of Nelson and Rodney,
Yeah.
the Renowns are the odd ones out because the R class, the QEs, and Hood all have roughly similar levels of protection. The F3s are going to have slightly better protection, as well
The
as speed and firepower.
Tiger has better protection
Hmm.
than the Renowns.
Yeah, but
You know,
the
Tiger's also
Renowns,
better.
because you know that Tiger's going to go away in 10 years. The same thing with the Iron Dukes and everything. They're kind of
Yes.
placeholders.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Renowns, they've got the firepower, they've got the speed, but they're the odd ones out for protection, even when they've been retrofitted with the 9-inch armor. So much as I do love them, and obviously Renown puts a real shift in World War II, I kind of wonder if the British, if they'd said, actually, no, we're going to stick with the F3 design, whether they could have then turned around to the Japanese and the Americans and gone, okay, look, you've got 16-inch gunships. We could ask for 16-inch gunships to level the playing field, but we're not going to. We're going to stick with our 15-inch gun ships, but in exchange, we would like to replace a couple of them in 5-6 years' time, kind of the same way that the French and the Italians got the early replacement clauses, although they didn't end up using them, because at that point that'll give the Renowns 10 years active service life, or potentially they could even argue maybe offer them for sale to Chile or something like that. I'm sure the Chileans would love to have one or two, and then go, okay, well we're gonna build up to our displacement limit, so 2 F3s instead of Nelson and Rodney, but we're also going to replace Renown and Repulse with 2 F3s. So now you have a 5-ship battle cruiser force, which means you will have 4, which means you will have your half battle squadron in place at any given time, your battle cruiser division. They're all fast, they're all well protected, they've all got 15-inch guns, and you now have a pretty much universal rough level of protection as standard across the fleet. Your baseline speed for the battle fleet is the R's, which are slightly faster than the standards, at least at that point. And you actually have a meaningful heavy battle cruiser formation. You've got your 5 battle cruisers, you've got 5 QEs, you've got your 5 Rs, you're holding on to 13.5 gunships until that's all completed. That will put Britain in a ridiculously different position come World War II. Because you've already got essentially 5 fast battleships sitting there before anyone starts building anything more.
No, not fast battleships. They are, in that way, 4 will be fully armored battle cruisers, and 1 will be a battle cruiser which has been modified. I'm not going to call it fast. I have this debate with people all the time. I don't even allow Vanguard to be called a fast battleship because she wasn't. She's a fully armored battle cruiser. And the reason you can say that is because the British are actually building fast battleships at the time. They're building the Lions. They're building the King George V. So if she'd been a fast battleship, they'd have called her a fast battleship.
But although at the same time, I'm using it as a broad moniker because the thing is, if you use the general fast battleship as in is supposed to stand in the line of battle and can go 25 knots or more,
28 knots.
Well,
28 knots
25 or more, because
28 knots is fast battleship.
That's
why the Yamato class on 28.
Well,
I'll fight that one.
If you make that the standard, you're still talking about the Scharnhorsts, the Italian refits, the Cavours and the Duilios, and the Dunkirks. They all fit into that very broad categorization. And to be perfectly honest, yes, Hood is a battle cruiser, but she has many of the characteristics of a fast battleship. But if you took Hood or the F3s and you put them up against a refit Cavour, a refit Duilio, the Scharnhorsts, or even the Dunkirks, they're just a little bit more capable.
It's not, especially if they've got the 15-inch 50s. It's just and if you upgrade the whole battle line, and then also Warspite has 15-inch 50s.
I mean, can you imagine what would have happened at Lofoten if instead of Renown you'd had Renown 2 F3 Boogaloo coming after the Scharnhorsts?
Well, that'd be 9 guns firing at them rather than 4 ranging forward, and that's going to change the outcome a little bit, just a tad.
Especially given the improvements in seakeeping and everything that came with the F3 design.
Oh yes, the F3 design was. It's one of those designs which, the more you look at it, the more you think, "Oh my lord, that would have been such a cool ship to have."
Well, and even if we assume that the Scharnhorst survived that engagement, of course, you've got the other one of the other engagements during Operation Berlin, where Rodney comes piling over the horizon and very nearly catches Gneisenau. If it's an F3, Gneisenau ain't getting away.
No, and in nicest way, let's be honest. We're talking about ships which would have 28 knots as their Royal Navy stated speed. Lord knows what Dalrymple Hamilton would get out of them. Because, again, this is the fun thing. You and I get into the speed debate about these ships. And for all these ships, it comes to the extent of the speed they can do It's not a completely variable, as much as
Mm,
they want to do thing, but it does depend on certain factors. There is the speed we do under normal conditions in peacetime
mm.
maintenance when we want to maintain the life of the ship. And there is the speed we can do if we don't give a flying hoot about the gearbox and the turbines and the boilers because we're
Mm.
going to replace them
Well,
soon.
this is another question, dry dock question that I've recently answered, where someone was like, they're actually talking about Samuel B. Roberts and her ability to do like 4.5 knots above her design speed at Samar,
Mm.
and I was pointing out, it's like, yeah, when you're talking about a geared steam turbine setup, you have your theoretical design speed. This is the design speed which you go at where you're not expecting sudden machinery casualties and where you're treating the machinery in such a way that you expect it to last for about 20 years with maintenance an arbitrary number of miles. Let's say every 10,000 miles of steaming, you need deep maintenance. Above that, you have okay, you're now decreasing the mileage between maintenance cycles margin. Then you have now you're starting to eat into the absolute lifetime of the machinery margin. Then you have okay, now you're potentially basically you're going to need a deep machinery refit after this voyage margin. And then above that, you have your engines may or may not explode at some point in the next few hours margin.
Yeah.
And those collectively add up to quite a bit of steam pressure, at which point your main consideration is, can the turbine train withstand it? Can you effectively deliver this power to the water without cavitation or without your prop shafts bending? That's all structural considerations. And does your hull form support this? Are you approaching your hull speed? And if you're an F3 type battle cruiser, so you've got a fairly, long hull, your hull speed is way north of 28 knots. You're not going to have to worry about that. And if you decide to absolutely like with Rodney, it's like, as you said, as far as Rodney was concerned, all the machinery had to survive was the next few days. And yeah, when you're talking about the machinery just has to stay alive for the next couple of days versus the machinery has to potentially stay alive for the next couple of months or years or under standard operating procedures. Yes, she was going for a refit, but under standard operating procedures, we're running the machinery as if we want it to last 10 years. If you're running the machinery under the auspices, we want the machinery to last 10 hours, you're going
You
to be
can do a
getting a
lot.
lot out of it.
And the thing is, again, you have an experienced engineering crew who have been training and doing these things for years. You basically go, I need everything you can give me to them. You don't
Mm,
tell them what you want, you tell them to give you everything you can give you.
mm,
And then you leave it to their judgment. And they will give you everything they can give you.
yeah.
And
I mean,
they
it's
will
like
know how
what
far
was it
they can push it. They will know.
on Top Gear when what was it when James May was driving the Bugatti Veyron?
Mhm.
I think it was May. May it might have been Clarkson,
Yeah,
but
it
it was
was
May.
May because they wouldn't trust Clarkson or
Yes,
the hamster
because
for
May somehow
sensible
is actually the best
reasons.
driver of the three. Um,
No, he's considered Captain Slow, so they thought he was the safest driver of
mm.
the three. He
but
wasn't,
but
but
there was that whole thing, wasn't there? Of like, was it something like at maximum speed? If you absolutely pushed it to its absolute maximum, the tires would blow in 20 something like 25 minutes, and they're like,
Mhm,
but that's okay because you run out of fuel in 17.
mhm.
Or something like that. And that's the kind of thing when you absolutely hammer a steam plant to the limit, it's like, what is going to break first? Are you going to run out of fuel first? Are your boilers going to explode first? Are your turbines going to strip first? Is your propeller going to fall off first? And which of these is the least disastrous? And how long until one of those things happens? Though it's not a case of, oh, this is the textbook limit. I mean, it's the same. It's even the same thing with a regular car. Everyone understands if you've got a petrol driven car and you rarely ever exceed between what's it 4.5, 5 on the RPM. Yeah, your
Yeah,
car will last forever and a day. You can go a heck of a lot faster if you push it to 8,000 RPM. Your car your engine block will be scrap in 6 months, but you will be going very fast until you
yeah.
get to that
It's like with
point.
the fuel starter thing.
Mm,
That's usually about 2 to 3. If you want to do an efficient cruise up
mm,
country, if you want to make sure your fuel lasts, you do 2 to 3,000 RPM, and that's what you keep your
mm.
engine in. But if you're not so worried about
Hmm.
fuel, but you want to get there quicker, you push it higher.
Yeah. And this is where hull design comes in on a lot of ships. It's like if you design your hull to be capable of more than your on paper statistics say that you're going to be doing, you actually build in a lot more capacity to that ship than if you go, this is our design speed, we're going to design our hull to just about get to that speed and no more because it's slightly cheaper. And it is the same thing that you have with the Roberts, because the Roberts is essentially built on a hull that's designed for a turbo electric drive, so it's much bigger and heavier in its
Mhm.
original variant, because you've got the Everts class, then you've got the turbo electric drive variant. I think it's the Buckleys, um, and those things are like 1,700 tons.
Yeah.
And then the John C. Butler class, which the Roberts is part of, it's the same hull, it's the same length to breadth ratio, it's theoretically the same power output on the power plant, but it's 1,350 tons. It's something like 400 tons lighter. Which, when you're talking about 1,750 to 1,350, that's a heck of a drop. So you essentially got the
Well,
hot rod lightweight version. So it's like, is it any surprise at that point that a hull that's designed to go at 24 knots with 12,000 shaft horsepower at 1,750 tons can go a little bit faster when you take
well,
400 tons off of that and you absolutely redline the engines?
well, to be fair, it's also like that when we start talking about speed power in terms of ships, in terms of their
Hmm.
performance, in terms of their cruising speed, because I've done a whole video about this recently and talking about in actually ships of this era and their design structures. And literally, the thing I was talking about was the fact that if a ship has a 10 knot cruising speed
Hmm.
versus a 12 knot cruising speed, guess what the time difference is between them going from New York to San Diego via the Panama Canal is?
It's going to be days,
Yeah.
at least.
Well,
Yeah.
10 knots will get you there in 20 days. 20, well, nearly
Hmm.
21. 12 knots will get you there in 16.9 days. If you can do 14 knots, you're getting there in a little over 14 days. And it's amazing what a small increase in cruising speed can do for your overall strategic mobility of your force and how quickly that can give you time.
Hmm.
And then you sort of go, well, if we're talking about the top speed, this is one of the reasons why I think
Hmm.
Navy stopped worrying so much about the top speed versus the cruising speed at certain points. Top speed is useful for battle maneuvers, etc. It really is.
Hmm.
But if you consider if you're traveling at 21 knots between New York and San Diego, that'll take you 9.6 days. If you're traveling at 24 knots, it'll take you 8.4 days. It really
Yeah.
doesn't give you that much of that top speed
Hmm.
increase doesn't give you that much. That isn't the strategic where the strategic mobility comes from. It's the cruising speed.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why, and this is completely off the topic of dreadnoughts, but why the American nuclear carriers were so useful for them, and why they needed nuclear cruisers to keep up with them, was the high cruising speed they can maintain and keep going
Yeah.
at the amount of power that came off the nuclear power plants. Not the top speed; it's the high cruising speed,
And
and it's
and I mean,
maintained.
you kind of see this as well in some of the design considerations, because for some reason it's really explicitly laid out in the post World War II British battleship designs
Hmm.
documents. It's like if you look into the pre-war, the interwar World War One battleship design documents, it's there, but it's nowhere near as explicitly laid out.
Oh
But
yes,
very, very, very clear in the post World War II stuff, where they're going, okay, what speed are we going to rate these ships at? And there's this all this back and forth, and eventually it's like, okay, but if we're going to say this is our consistent top speed and this is our consistent cruise speed, it's not actually what the ship's capable of doing. It's what is this ship capable of doing fully loaded in wartime loading conditions after 6 months out of dry dock, so potentially with fouling and
yeah.
so forth, and in the tropics where everything is a little bit slower anyway because of the temperature. And they're like, that is our top speed. And that's part of the reason that causes all this confusion when it comes to designing the
Isn't
post
it?
World War II British battleship designs, because they're like, well, if we want it to be a 30 knot ship under those conditions, then brand factory new under standard loading, this thing's going to go 35 knots. And that's needs a worrying amount of power
Well,
for a capital ship.
it's
And
like Dr. Dan always says. He
mm,
always comes out whenever it's speed. He then, especially out of Royal Navy ships. He goes in all
mm,
weathers and conditions.
yes,
You know,
I mean
that's the favourite thing. Whenever we take him around on the ship-shaped trips,
mm,
every time he's looking at speed, he goes, "Is that in all weather and conditions?" It's his
yeah, and
catchphrase almost, and it's yeah,
you have the same thing. You know, some people were upset when I did the Daring class video because I said, look, the Darings are officially rated by the Royal Navy at 30 knots, which
yes,
sounds very slow for a destroyer, especially a post World War II destroyer. And like, no, but we've got loads of evidence the Darings could go a lot faster than that. Like, yes, they could.
yes,
The Darings, but the
they
Royal Navy
could.
said the Darings we can guarantee will do 30 knots overloaded wartime conditions in the middle of the Indian Ocean or the Western Pacific, 6 months out of dock. That's when it'll do 30 knots. We will always do 30 knots. In more optimal circumstances, we will go faster than that, but we can't necessarily guarantee that all the time. Um,
I think the and I only found this as a notation in someone's diary. I couldn't really verify it. The highest speed I've seen recorded for a Daring class was 43 knots, and that ship was fresh, but it was basically the person who was in charge of it was the son of a World War II a Royal Navy captain who had, been in charge of a flotilla
mm,
at the beginning of World War II. His son, post World War II, has risen to the rank in which he's now got his own destroyer, and he's got his dad aboard.
mm,
And he basically wants to show off what his new ship can do. So he got the chief to
mm. Open the
to see
taps.
open the taps and see how fast they could go.
Mm. And I mean, it kind of comes back to the whole thing of you can have your on paper statistics, but the stuff that backs that up is incredibly important. And
Mhm.
when I finally get a hold of that book on Froud, um,
Mm.
I need to do a video on Froud because the amount of contribution that Froud's testing tanks and all the principles he worked out and the head start that gave the Royal Navy on hull form design really can't be underestimated because as I said, like if you design a hull form that is actually really designed for a higher top speed than your on paper top speed, you will get a lot more performance out of it. But it's also just a general thing of if you have a really, really advanced hull design, you're underwater, your ship will be capable of so much more than when it matters, it will be able to do so much more than what people might otherwise expect. And it's the kind of thing you're never going to see until you actually need it. And in most cases, even when that does happen, either in the more modern era, people will just go, yes, quietly, we're going to quietly classify that particular incident, or you get people who just are like, oh no, I don't believe that. Which I always find perennially interesting in it, like when I did the video about how fast Rodney went chasing Bismarck,
Mhm.
and people are like, oh, it's absolutely impossible. She could never reach 25 knots. And I'm sitting there going, did you not listen to the video? She was like within zero point 0.8 of a knot of that on her trials. And, you won't find many people disbelieving that the Iowas can do 35 knots when their notional top speed is 33. And to be perfectly honest, you won't find many people who will doubt that the Iowas could probably do a reasonable bit, maybe a bit more than that. And it's like, yeah, that's perfectly plausible. There's no reason not to believe that. Despite the fact that the trial speeds for the Iowas are well such trial speeds as they are because obviously they're commissioned in wartime,
Yeah.
but the trials for the Iowas, their top speed on speed trials is much closer to their design speed than Rodney and Nelson were. No, Nelson and Rodney exceeded their design speed by a much greater margin, and then people are like, oh no, but they couldn't possibly have got that extra zero point 0.8 of a knot. And I'm sitting there going, well, the whole form indicates they obviously can, and you're talking about a pull out all the stops and
On the
don't care if
point
the
of the
machinery is going to die situation. Of course they can go that fast.
on the point of the hull form, as we were just
Mm,
discussing, the F3, the hull form differential between the F3 and the Nelrod design is not that big. In fact, honestly, it's all pretty much variations on the same hull form they've
mm,
worked out as the next high speed ship.
mm,
And that's the point. the hull form for the F3s, we're talking about ships which had a design speed of
Mm,
28 knots, which you and I are fairly certain would have gone be able to go a lot faster if they
mm.
wanted to.
Well, yeah, you've
And
got
so, in a nice way, it's the same hull form. So the hull form can do faster. All
mm,
you're worrying about at that point is engine life.
yeah, and
And
when
if you don't give a hoot
you're
about
coming at
that,
that point off of a design lineage with the L3s and the Ks and H's and J's and G's and everything. You're coming off a design lineage where they've just been working out how to move ships that displace 50% more, and how to get them moving at 32, 33 knots. The amount of work that went into the whole form of those ships, and then someone's been told, oh no, you just have to make it a little bit smaller and not quite as fast. Is like all those tricks and tips that you've just worked out. If you incorporate them into those hulls, it's like, yes, you will make your design speed. You will also be able to go a lot faster if you want to.
yes, and that's a useful thing.
Mm,
That is an advantageous thing for the Royal Navy. But this is the thing is what people like. The fun thing is again, it's the design for figure, and you and I come across this quite a lot in
mm,
sloops because I remember once. I think it was I was the first one. Hadn't heard the story of Tsingtao in January 1939
mm.
until I told you about it, and I went, yeah. Somehow this sloop, which is designed for a top speed of 20 knots, keeps pace with a town class cruiser, which is racing there at top speed. It's
Oh yeah.
it's not designed to go faster than 20
Mm,
knots. Everyone knows its official speed is 20 knots. Yet
mm,
somehow a town class cruiser, which is racing at a lot faster than 20 knots to get there, and it's the only thing that makes
mm.
sense in the timeline available, and the little sloop keeps up with it the whole way without ever bothering. There's no notation of the sloop falling behind. The sloop arrives in the port at exactly the same time. It left at the same time, goes through the exact same seas, it keeps in station the whole way, and arrives at the same time.
Well, and then you've got other things like when Johnny Walker has his sloop squadron out in the Bay of Biscay,
Mhm.
and the Germans thinking about going after them with the units they've got available on the western coast of France, and then the Ju-88 recon aircraft show up, and he turns his formation in a battle line towards them, and the Germans come back with, there's a British cruiser squadron in the Bay of Biscay. We probably don't want to send a destroyer unit after them. And it's like, you can, to a certain extent, yeah, if you squint at long distance, you can forgive possibly, if you've got a bit of a frontal profile, a Black Swan type sloop can look kind of like a Leander class. They both got
Kind
three
of.
twin turrets and so
Maybe
forth.
an Arethusa.
Yeah.
Maybe an
Oh yeah,
Arethusa,
sorry,
you
an
know.
Arethusa. Yeah,
Mm.
that's the three turret design. But the German aerial recon pilots aren't idiots. If they see a bunch of ships tootling along at 18 to 20 knots, supposedly charging them, they're going to be going, yeah, something's not quite right about this. We should take a look into this a bit closer. And then just they would discover that they're sloops. But no, the German pilots are like, we saw a bunch of ships with three twin turrets and they were moving fast.
Yeah,
That's like we put two and two together and came up with a
cruiser.
light cruiser squadron. Therefore, let's not attack them with Narviks and so forth. Despite the fact, obviously, yeah, a squadron of Narvik class would have been an overwhelming force for the trio of sloops. But this is the kind of thing. A lot of the time, it's not even reading between the lines. It's just looking at the reports and going, well, what is the most obvious explanation for this? If you were, and I think this is the thing, is like a lot of the time people will go there and go, oh no, but obviously it's this. It's like, well, if you're saying obviously, then that it's something different from what was reported, then you're also saying the people who reported it were a bunch of idiots, which they really weren't.
I
Um,
think it's honestly, I find it strange in that people will turn around and tell me that the Italians were disobeying the rules and were lying about their capabilities. The Germans were lying about their capabilities. The Americans were lying about their capabilities. The Japanese were lying about their capabilities. The French were to an extent lying about their capabilities. And yet somehow the British are completely honest. I know we've done a very good job. We've snowed the world better than the Austrians, who've convinced everyone every time that it's that nothing there is nothing of them to do with either world war. Okay, nothing Austrian to do with either World War. But the British have managed to snow the world rather well into believing that we always honestly tell the truth, 100% about our naval capabilities.
Now,
And
the thing people, I think, always forget is that there's more than one way of playing the rules. You can just lie,
yes,
which is, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine for some people.
but if you're
But
caught out, you're in trouble, and that's also going to cause you to have problems.
yeah, but you can do the advanced lying, which is that we're not
Statistics?
we're not technically lying. We
No.
just have either specifically written the rules in such a way that massively favor us, like they did with the whole
Water as armor,
what is
for which
defined as
saves
standard
from the treaties of
displacement.
them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, or you do things like, yeah, the capabilities of this are this, and we will demonstrate that they are this. The fact that those capabilities may be because we've put a limiter on the engines, or that they may be because we designed this ship for but not with things like belt armor. It's like, yeah, this is like with the county class. It's like, yes, this is a 10,000-ton cruiser. Yes, it has box armor. Yes, it has 8-inch guns. Yes, it can move at a certain speed. You can inspect it, you could tear it apart, you could look at it back to front and reassemble it. It does exactly what it says on the tin. The fact that I'm 99.9% convinced that they specifically designed it with the hull in mind to just afterwards go back and say, yeah, we're sticking 4.5 inches of armor on to finish off the belt. That's just, that just happens to be a happy accident, clearly.
Well, and with the engines, as you and I
Hmm,
both know, it's very easy. You go, well, no, we have some
hmm,
emergency bypass valves for if there's a problem,
hmm,
and or extra fuel pipe lines,
hmm,
etc., and things. So it goes to the boilers, etc. And then when you need to, you just turn the emergency ones on, and
hmm,
they were designed as an emergency. This is an emergency. The fact of doing that means we have now got double the fuel coming to the boiler, and we're able to pump up the pressure and do all sorts of things. That's just that's just a happy accident. Just it happens. It's an emergency. It's a bypass valve. And all these things are very easy to fit into a system, and everyone does it at this point. And it's not really so much lying as you are factoring in these things for your own security, your own ability to do these things.
hmm.
And I think we have mentioned the German battle cruisers, but I
Well, yeah,
think
it all comes under German capital ship design. It's all much of
yes,
a
but
muchness because,
but
I mean, again, to their credit, the Germans are trying to, mostly thanks to the Kaiser, they are trying to merge the battle cruiser and the battleship into a kind of a fast capital ship unit.
well,
And to
this
be
is my
fair, they're
main
doing
problem with the Mackesons.
yeah, well, they're doing a more creditable job of it, I think, than the Japanese. Because in the first episode, we talked
Oh,
about my reservations with the
yes,
Japanese, where the Japanese
yes.
have basically invented a slightly slower, marginally better protected battle cruiser as their idea of the fast battleship, whereas the Germans, 5 years before, have gone, okay, we actually will have what's really actually much closer to a fast battleship than a slow battle cruiser.
Hmm.
Just have
I
to edit
would
this bit
say
out because someone's at the door.
okay. Now, with the Mackesons, the thing that I always find interesting about them is that they are going to have these 350 millimeter guns, these 35
14 point
centimeter
something.
guns, 13.8 inch,
Hmm.
guns, and they have their five big torpedo tubes. They have all these systems. You sit there and go, look at them and go, yes, they're 28 knot ships. And realistically, if they do come into service, they are a problem. They're a problem for the Royal Navy, though, more because the Royal Navy hasn't built the 15-inch successor to the Tigers, than that the Royal Navy couldn't actually deal with them. Because sometimes the discussion goes, people go, oh no, if they come into service, they'd have wiped out the Royal Navy. And you go, well, no, they'd have possibly wiped out what Jackie Fisher wanted to build the Royal Navy to be in terms of the original admirals and the renowns. But if they've been further along, the odds are that whole successor to the Tiger comes along, because the Tiger. This is the interesting thing to me is usually when I want to look at where the British could have come up with a really good fast battleship design. You're looking at the Queen Elizabeth class and you're looking at HMS Tiger,
Mm.
and it's somewhere between those two. It's something from that sort of lineage and that sort of scenario, because Tiger is the British battle cruisers slowly heading in that direction. They're still getting quite fast in speed, but let's be honest, Tiger's 28,000 tons. She's got 1,000 tons on Renown and Repulse. She's far, far denser in terms of her subdivision, in terms of her armor coverage. And, if the Admirals had actually been successors to Tiger rather than Renowns, you probably wouldn't have needed to do the same amount of work on them. The
Well, I
odds
mean,
are actually, if the Admirals had been 15-inch gun versions of built on the same principles as the Tigers, all four of them would have been built in World War One,
well, I mean,
because they would have
yeah.
been able to do what was required
The
to do.
other thing you've got to remember is that although they have the slightly weird origins in a request for a shallow draft Queen Elizabeth, ultimately Hood and the admirals, the way that they turn out design wise, is essentially what happens when the British hear about the Mackensons. They get the incorrect report that the Mackensons are armed with 15-inch guns, and they go, "Oh, we need to reply to this."
Mm-hmm.
And Hood is essentially ultimately the result to that. Um, which obviously, if the Mackensons had been completed, it leaves the Mackensons at a little bit of a disadvantage because, well, protection wise, the Hoods are well protected. They're a little bit faster than the Mackensons, and they have heavier firepower. The slightly weird thing is, of course, that what the British were worried the Mackensons were going to be turns out to be near enough as makes no difference the stat line for the Ersatz Yorks. Um,
It's almost as if they get the wrong design study. It's as they get almost as if they get the York's design study and think that's the Mackesons. Because
mm,
when you consider the differentials of what they're projecting on the
yeah.
Mackesons, it does make them look far more like the Ersatz Yorks. It really
Yeah.
does.
Well, and I think
Uh,
this is the thing. It's like people always seem to forget that the ship, you have the ship design, and then the ship design is frozen because they have to order the long lead items,
mhm.
and then you lay the ship down. And at the certainly in the 1900s and 1910s, by the time you've got to the keel laying of that ship, you should, in theory, be a good chunk of the way into designing its successor, because the successor is supposed to be laid down the next year. And you've got to do your design checks, design freeze, or an order of long lead items pretty much the same year that you're laying down the predecessor. So, when you hear that the Germans are building a new class of battle cruiser, aka the Mackensons, if somebody goes, okay, swipe the latest information on the latest German battle cruiser concepts, I mean, that's Yorks are kind of retrofitted onto the Mackensons in the end. But if someone's looking for the latest concepts, they're going to find something that's a lot more like the Ersatz Yorks than the Mackensons, because the Mackensons will be like, by the time they're laid down, that design is a year old,
To be fair,
essentially.
though, the Yorks are going to be in an even worse position to fight the Admirals than the Mackesons were, because they're actually slower and their protection hasn't gone up that much. They've dropped down to 27 knot ships
Well,
officially.
this is kind of why why I say they're kind of retro in a lot of ways. The Ersatz Yorks are kind of retrofitted onto the Mackensons because they are, to a certain extent, someone going, hang on a minute, the Mackensons might not cut it against the latest stuff that the British are building, and so we need to change things up quite quickly. So because if you look at the overall design of the
Hmm.
Mackensons, and then you go, okay, but what the Ersatz Yorks are essentially Mackensons, but with 15-inch guns. Um, they're slightly heavier as a result, but you look at the dimensions, then they're not even 20 foot longer, and they've
No.
got the same beam, so they are, and it's the same power plant as well. So and well, basically the same armor protection because they're essentially here's a Mackinson hull. We're going to make it just long enough to fit these 15-inch guns, and we're going to call it a day. Which, as an emergency design, that's fair. But you can kind of see the design lineage in as much as that they cancel almost half the Mackinson class and just go, okay, we're building Ersatz Yorks instead. They're not a clean slate design.
They're really not. And again, it's one of those things of you start looking at the drums and you go, this is the point where I sometimes get into trouble with people because
Mm,
people sometimes consider this when I'm talking these through because I often talk about it from a design strategic background, what they're doing, how they're
mm,
building this stuff together. I think I'm being rude about the Germans. I go, no, they have less options. They have less infrastructure. They have less industry to draw from, and they find themselves in a bind because they also have the scenario that if the costs go up too much, they will get slammed by the army. They have a ceiling. Whereas in the UK, it's almost as if the army's costs go up too much, it gets slammed by the navy. That's the differential you're talking about, which is the primary service, which can always get the funding. It's usually the navy in this period when we're talking about
mm,
Britain. It's the army in Germany, and that's always a handicap when they're designing because they have to be in many ways even more conservative than the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy is being very conservative in what they're doing. Now, we did talk,
mm,
St. Vincent's could have been 13.5-inch gunships. There is a very real possibility the Queen Elizabeth could have been 16.5-inch
mm.
gunships because there is a 16.5-inch 42, 45 design going around at that time. And if they had gone with a 16.5-inch, then goodness knows what the poor Americans do. They decide not to because they're worried of what it's going to have effect in terms of the qualitative race, I think, between America, Japan, Britain, and Italy. Those are the four main contenders in it. The Austro-Hungarians actually take more part of the qualitative race than the Germans do. If I have to add another power into the qualitative race, it's always the Austro-Hungarians. It's not the Germans because they will build less ships, but when they build them, they will build them as a great leap forward. And it's a case of, oh, this is the Tegetovs,
Mm.
and of course the other the Ersat class that's coming out,
Monarch, yeah.
the Ersat Monarchs ones, they're various other ones.
Mm,
Those are some very interesting
mm.
designs, and it's
Well, and
always fun when you start.
I've done a 5-minute guide on some of the other planned designs that they come up with because they keep their design bureau going during
Yeah,
World War I, and yeah, I mean, to be honest, much as I say the Ersatz Yorks are basically the Mackinsons warmed over for 15-inch guns. It's not necessarily a strike on the German designers, as you said. It's a
no,
strike on resources. They've got
yeah,
a war going on. The army's, eating up most of the budget. The German Navy's going, we want 15-inch gun battle cruisers, and I'm sure the designers would have loved to sit down and go, we're going to design one from scratch, but they're under time constraints, they're under budgetary constraints. They don't have the capacity to do that. What they do have the capacity to do is slightly redraw the Mackinsons.
yeah.
And so that if that's what you're going to be able to justify budget and time wise, that's what you have to do. Um, I mean,
Although,
to be honest, to a certain degree, you almost see the similar thing with the Iowas.
mm,
Much as the Iowas are, good ships, ultimately the Iowas are here as a South Dakota. Let's stretch it enough to make it go fast. And then when people start to complain that it's not any more heavily armed, we're going to stick some 16-inch 50s instead of 16-inch 45s on it. That is the core fundamental design of the Iowas. And that's partly, I mean, obviously the Iowas aren't designed while war is going on for the US because they're laid down before all of that, but they are designed with the sword of Damocles of war hanging over them because war's already kicked off in Europe and the US is thinking that it's coming sooner rather than later. So again, it's easier, faster, and to a certain extent cheaper to go existing design, stretch, fit, build than it is to go clean slate design. Because yeah, I'm
oh,
sure
it
they would have
is.
loved to go clean slate design. You look
Yeah.
at some of the design options for the Iowas that are closer to clean slate, and they're very, very different ships. but you know you have to play with the cards you're dealt, not your ideal. Um,
And that's often the point which is misunderstood when we start talking about Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, especially. Because the amount of times I get told, no, they're battle cruisers, not fast battleships, because they have 11-inch guns. And I sit there and go, no, that's the Germans would have loved them to have 15-inch guns. They'd have loved them to have anything but
mm,
11-inch guns. But that's all their industry at that time could build. So they either got ships with 11-inch guns or they didn't get
yeah.
ships.
And
And that
and
was their
again,
choice.
they've got political considerations because the Kriegsmarine turns around to Hitler and says, we could get Krupp to build a 15-inch gun. You know,
Hmm.
have to wait a little bit, but they could do it because obviously normally as a long lead item, you order the gun before you order the ships.
Yeah.
You could start construction on them designed for 15-inch guns and hope that Krupp comes up with the goods. Which, you know, ultimately fair enough, they probably would have done. But Hitler goes, oh, for political reasons, so we don't want to annoy the British quite as much as we will later on, just at the moment. And so, you know, and to be fair, it kind
Although,
of works because he's like, well, if we build them with 11-inch guns, the British won't think they're as much of a threat. And he's right. The British
yeah.
look at the Scharnhorst and go, cool story, bro. We're not really that worried about those. Whereas if they built them from the start with six twin 15s, you can guarantee the British would have been going, oh, hang on a minute. We're not very happy about this.
Well, no, sorry, I sincerely start to doubt you get the 14-inch King George V, or rather, you possibly still get the
Mm.
first three, but I reckon the last two might actually be the first two Lions. Because
Well,
let's be honest, and what have the British done with
mm,
their design period at this point? You know, the King George
yeah.
V's are these are 14-inch guns. The Lions are this is a slightly stretched design which has 16-inch guns on it and can do 30 knots.
Yeah,
Anyone
and
want
well,
to
and
argue?
as we know, the whole like how many ships can we build per year, and the introduction of the Vanguard design
Yeah.
by sort of reusing spare 15-inch guns, that's all predicated on the investment in the infrastructure to be able to build enough armor and so forth, so they can lay down additional capital ships um, per year. But that's predicated on the what they think the current naval balance is going to be. If the Scharnhorsts are being built somewhat earlier in the timeline, well, they're built at the same time, but you know
Mm.
the advent of a 15-inch armed, potentially hostile capital ship is happening a bit earlier. Then at that point, the Royal Navy is in a much stronger position to go. We don't necessarily have anything that can match that at the moment because Renown and Repulse, similar firepower, similar speed, much less armor. Hood, okay, it's got slightly more firepower, similar speed, similar levels of protection, but there's only one of her, and there's two of them. And the King George V, yes, we understand that's what we will build for our capital ships. And yes, okay, you know, 10 14-inch versus 6 15-inch, probably the firepower advantage lies with a battleship. Yes, it's better protected, but it is slower, so we can't force the engagement. So what is the solution? Well, we have this design for a Vanguard type. It's got slightly more firepower, better protection, similar speed. This is what we need quite a few of. We need to start the investment in armor production and so forth a bit sooner. And so, yeah, instead of having Vanguard as being uh, laid down kind of towards the end of the King George V paradigm going into the Lions, you could end up with Vanguard being laid down probably what contemporaneous with Duke of York and Prince of Wales.
Well,
They
we
won't.
should
I
probably
don't think
put
they quite get the infrastructure upgraded in time to have a laid down contemporary with King George V. But as for the second tranche of King George V, I think by that point they might have, if they've been kick-started by 15-inch Scharnhorsts, you might then have Prince of Wales and Duke of York and
well,
Vanguard, and
well,
then Anson and Howe and second Vanguard.
well. You see, King KGV and Prince of Wales are laid down in January 1937. Duke York May 37. And Anson and Howe are July and June actually in 1937. So honestly, you probably if you consider the yards they're laid down on, it's Vickers Armstrong, Newcastle upon Tyne, Camel Laird in Birkenhead, John Brown and Clydebank, Swan Hunter Wallsend, and Fairfield's Govan. Now, if you think about that, there's another couple of yards which are around which could build a Vanguard size hull quite easily. There's at least a couple of yards, so you could have done it. And it's the similar thing with the carriers scenario, honestly, when
Hmm.
you start looking at the Royal Navy and its carrier construction, because
Yeah, so you'd be looking at a Vanguard in late 36 and another in late 37.
well, ordered probably November 36 along with Duke of York.
Yeah.
It could well be laid down in May 37 then,
Hmm.
and you might order the other one in April 37, which means it's laid down in July 37. Because
Hmm.
that's of course the British order their ships at 2 points in the year, but
Hmm.
they could be laid down very similarly. So
Because they're going financial year rather than calendar
yes.
year.
So Duke of York, so probably you get Vanguard ordered with Duke of York at the towards the
Hmm.
end of the previous financial year, and then another one ordered with Anson and Howe at the beginning of the next financial year.
And
And
another
the thing,
probably, and then another one ordered with Lion and Temeraire. And
yes,
because it's not going to face the delays due to gun construction that Lion and Temeraire did, and the fact they're working with a pre-existing design, you'd probably just about get that one completed as well. Because I
although
think
that
if
does,
Lion and
that,
Temeraire hadn't had the projected issues with building the 16-inch guns, it's entirely possible they would have been completed mid-war.
yes,
And if you've got a third Vanguard being laid down with them, it's not going to have that problem. So they can quite easily go, okay, well, we still may not get Lion and Temeraire, but we will get the third Vanguard.
I think if you do have three Vanguards though coming into service of the Royal Navy during World War II, you have a very different scenario building up quite quickly.
Hmm.
Because if you consider the one laid down earliest with the Duke of York, if we consider when Duke of York actually comes into service and
Hmm.
is actually commissioned, well, she herself is commissioned in August 1941. But the odds are, because of 15-inch 42s, all those things going in, and
You don't have to
let's
go through
speak.
gunnery trials and test periods and that for that kind of armament.
So honestly, you could find that rather than getting as delayed as Duke of York is, she could end up being completed roughly alongside with Prince of Wales at January
Hmm.
1941. And you could end up with, them coming in almost with the batch ahead. So that leads to the Royal Navy having these two extra fully armored dreadnoughts as part of their force structure. Which means, do you have repulse going off with Prince of Wales to the Far East for starters?
Well, the
Where
thing
do
is,
these
if
extra ships
Vanguards
wandering around?
come in with Prince of Wales, then that means she's going to be in a roughly similar state to Prince of Wales, but without the slightly problematic guns.
Yeah,
Which means she's probably sitting alongside Prince of Wales, King George V, and Hood in Scapa when
yeah.
Bismarck sails. At which point, with the best will in the world, if Tovey is going to insist on staying back with a capital ship, um, you might as well send Vanguard, Prince of Wales, and maybe King George V. Either he stays with KGV and tells Hood to essentially take over his staff duties in Scapa, or he transfers his flag to Hood and sends out the two KGVs and Vanguard.
Mhm.
Because yeah, we know Hood's machinery was pretty much on her last legs by the time of Denmark Strait, thanks to all the shenanigans she'd been going through at the beginning of the war. And you know, if you've got that extra fast battleship, you might as well send it. And if you've got, if you, yeah, I suppose because then the thing is when you, I think Vanguard might end up being then sent for said because if they're going to pair her, well, I think it depends on who does she replace. Because if she replaces Prince of Wales,
Yeah.
then for said is faster because Repulse is a battle cruiser. Vanguard can do more than 30 knots, so the overall speed of the force is higher. Which of course then lends a whole other interesting scenario of what happens to Force said because as we know the Japanese strike was running on fumes when they finally found them. If you give
Yeah.
that force a couple more knots and it's hightailing it back to Singapore, it's not going to be in the same place.
Well,
they may never
as
be
we've talked
found.
about before, the Japanese aircraft are running on fumes. They have no fighter escort. They ditched their guns so they could do that. If you have even a smidgen of fighters over that task group, the Japanese aircraft are getting massacred and there's no loss.
Mm,
It's one of those scenarios where literally everything that could go lucky for the Japanese
mm,
goes lucky for the Japanese, and they
yeah,
pull it off, and that's an amazing feat.
but in this
But
scenario, if you've got
if you
Vanguard and
try
Repulse
to repeat that with
hightailing it to
dice,
Singapore, they're just not going to be there.
no,
That
yeah.
Japanese scout that finally finds Prince of Wales and Repulse will just be circling an empty sea, and they're 20 miles further southwest. So the whole attack just doesn't happen. Um,
At which point
the
you
more
end up with
interest,
two quite fast, quite
yeah,
interesting ships sitting in there going, so the Japanese are planning on coming down here with cruisers.
mm,
Oh, goody. We're dedicated. You're a dedicated cruiser killer, aren't you, Repulse? Yes. Oh, goody. Let's have
mm.
fun.
I mean the slightly other interesting scenario is, of course, what happens if you put Vanguard instead of Repulse.
Mhm.
If Repulse sticks around to deal with stuff in Europe, then theoretically the force is going to be in the same place because they're limited by the speed of Prince of Wales. But Vanguard has a much better anti-aircraft suite than Repulse, and even if she ends up getting caught in a pincer the way that Repulse does, her torpedo defense system is going to be far superior. So she's, if you look at where Repulse got hit, Vanguard's torpedo defense system can probably eat that hit and keep going. And the Japanese have only a finite number of torpedoes. Um,
They
Prince of
use them
Wales,
all.
yeah, but one thing is, by the time they hit Repulse, they're running out of torpedoes
Yeah.
available in the air. Repulse goes down partly because she has essentially a non-existent torpedo defense system as far as modern torpedoes are concerned, and when she takes that first hit, she slows down massively and becomes a sitting target. If you transpose that hit onto Vanguard, she'll slow down slightly, but she's far less troubled by it. At which point, between that and a modern anti-aircraft suite, the chances of actually hitting her with any follow-ups is very remote. I mean, it's assuming everything else goes the same, assuming that the Vanguard's better AA system doesn't break up the air attack on Prince of Wales. Prince of Wales is probably still not long for this world because of that hit to the stern, but you'll at least recover one ship out of the situation.
And I think the other scenario you have to think about is if you are ordering those extra capital ships earlier on, that also probably pushes you, because of the way the British work, it's also probably going to push a carrier earlier on. It's going to sound strange, but it means when you lay down an Ark Royal, if you're laying down King George V, Prince of Wales, Duke of York, all those in 1930, sort of Anson, Howe, all those, and two Vanguards in 1937, then the odds are, if we consider it, you're laying down the illustrious class or the implacables a lot earlier, because the illustrious class, they're all laid down in 1937 as well, and there's four of them laid down. And the implacables, which come after them, which are the 27,000 ton variant of the design tree, are laid down in 39 historically. But if you're laying down the vanguards along with if you're laying down the vanguards along with the King George V's, there's got to be a temptation to either lay down a second formidable style illustrious class
Mm-hmm.
or lay down an implacable earlier on. Because one of the things the Royal Navy thinks out of its carriers, you have to remember again, is you've got the whole thing of their carrier designs of, and you've seen my PhD thesis, and hopefully will be open so more people can see it soon as well. You've got the cruiser carrier function, which is for your scouts and reconnaissance. You've got your fleet carrier function, which is to keep your fleet, and your strike carrier function. And the thing is, you're supposed to have fleet carriers to keep up with your different moving fleet elements, your different task forces as they're moving along. You're suddenly building these faster ships. That means your older carriers can't keep up with them, so you need to build the newer carriers that much faster. And if you're abandoning the treaties enough that you're already building the vanguards, I wouldn't be surprised if you find there's an extra carrier ordered as well, and that has an impact on Force Z because you might find the Force Z turns up, it's actually a carrier and I don't know, Vanguard and Prince of Wales, in which case Force Z becomes a very, very nasty thing for anyone to come across unless they're in full strength. Yeah, it's one of those things of it's you have to when you're doing, especially looking at history as it happened. A lot of it's whilst post hoc ergo propter hoc is a very good logical fallacy of after therefore because of it doesn't usually work that there is a lot of things which go well if you change this one bit just a bit then that's going to have to force others to change to react and that's going to have a cumulative effect because especially if you have the British building these ships earlier to react to the Germans building them, the French are also going to react, which is going to force the Italians to react. And probably at a certain point in this, then the British have to react more because they're having to worry about both the Italians and the Germans. And then that's going to cause the Japanese to react, which is going
Hmm.
to cause the Americans to react. And then everyone's building more ships suddenly.
Although the interesting thing, of course, is what can the others do? Because I mean, the Germans are a little bit constrained in the fact that they only have you know, you think Britain's shipyard building capacity took a hit after World War One. Germany would like to have words.
The Treaty of Versailles, the only section which the British government really cared about the Treaty of Versailles was the part which denuded Germany of the ability to build
Mm,
have a naval infrastructure.
yeah. Because
Entirely.
you look at like when they're building the Graf Zeppelins and the Bismarcks, and pretty much the whole story is when Scharnhorst and Gneisenau have gotten off the slipways, we can start building these other ships.
Well, they actually
Um,
rush them and cause themselves complications because they
yeah.
push them off the slipways too soon, and then they have issues they
Mm.
have to fix in them,
Yeah, so
which is another
Germany
reason
doesn't
why.
really have the capacity to build any more capital ships any faster. I mean, the only option they potentially could have would be to go, actually, we're not going to build carriers. Because if you somehow persuade them not to build the Graf Zeppelin and Flugzeugträger Bear, her sister ship, then theoretically that opens up a pair of slipway spots, although, you know, one after the
to,
other. So that potentially
to
gives you an extra
be,
ship. Um, but that's really the limitation for the Germans. The Italians, on the other hand, theoretically they have the infrastructure, but the Italians don't really have the money. Um, and the
but
Japanese have neither the infrastructure nor the money.
I
Yeah,
think
there's a chart someone put together. I've got somewhere which is like showing all the big slipways, and it's kind of like, you know, here there goes the Shikaku, in comes another ship, another hull. There goes Yamato,
mm,
in comes another hull. They're similarly their infrastructure capped out. Now
yeah,
I suppose there are I think the Japanese probably have the most options, I would say,
they
but
do have one
The
yard
Italians
which
just
they
don't.
really aren't using. They do have
Well,
one yard.
yeah.
They have a couple of yards which are for political reasons they're just not using,
Well, the
and they
thing is,
might
if
just
the
be for the
Italians don't
horsing.
have the cash, the Japanese are basically going for broke, so they don't really care that they technically don't have the cash long term. But when you do look at that chart for their big slipways, some of their big slipways are occupied by cruisers, which in theory, although they're pretty large, in theory, you might be able to build those elsewhere.
Mhm.
So, in theory, the Japanese could go, okay, if we're absolutely desperate for capital units and we're prepared to shake loose the extra few billion yen, then we could not build a cruiser on, or a seaplane carrier or a light carrier on that slipway, move it to a smaller slipway somewhere, and put a capital ship or two on there.
I think
Even then, it's a limited amount of reaction that they can do.
I think it's more of a tech response I'd be expecting because that's the easiest thing for many of them
Mm.
to do. If the Germans go for a 15-inch,
Scharnhorst.
Scharnhorst design, the British are going to respond by building vanguards. I do agree.
Mm.
It's either going to be vanguards or it's the nicest way. The King George V's are not getting built as 14-inch gun ships. Um, and that's the scenario that also can lead to the British building at least one extra carrier hull. I wouldn't be surprised because of the way the British work out their carriers and the way they work their analysis through of what they need for their carriers. I can see then that the Germans are going to want to follow that up, but if they've got a working 15-inch gun design, that's actually going to make them to an extent quicker getting the Bismarcks and things sorted through. But there's going to be a whole desire of what they're going to do with them. The Italians, I think, you're right. They don't have necessarily the cash. They do have the infrastructure, but they could exploit that infrastructure and go, well, hang on. What do we want to do here with our Littorios and our second batch of Littorios? Because if you're laying these down in 1937, if you consider the second batches of the Littorios and when they are laid down in 38. And I think what you could get, what the Italians might go for, is they decide to go for a 12-gun Littorio design or something like that. Something which is relatively easy for them to boost up, but it's going to give them that much more capability, that much more sort of status. Because, again, this is the one thing which is so true about all the fascist dictators. They are very much dictators. They are obsessed with how big they look. They really are. If they can find a long nosed car, they actually, I swear, they have a competition over who has the longest nosed car. Have you ever noticed that? Never noticed that sort of Hitler turns up at one display with a car which has this long a nose, and then Mussolini goes and gets a new car which has another even longer nose, and it's a constant competition over who has the longest nosed car.
Or you remember that Top Gear episode where James May showed up in the Idi Amin mobile?
Yes.
Where it's like the car is like 60% bonnet length. And I think it was a bit of a steering issue, wasn't it? Because you're so far back, you're steering past the point of behind the point of rotation. So you're like, okay, well, my nose is now halfway across the street, and I still haven't actually come out of the car park yet.
Yeah, it's a fun thing. As for the Japanese, though, their basic option is they have to use the two yards which are realistically restricted to commercial activity because of political reasons. They piss off the wrong people in the navy, family wise, and they could build some cruisers. And what the you see the problem I think for the Japanese is they really can't build any more Yamatos than they're building. They really can't. Even if no matter what the will is, there's no way. They just don't have the infrastructure industry. So
Well,
the interesting thing
you
with
look at
them
the amount
is,
of infrastructure upgrades they had to do to build the two that they did.
I'm wondering if they get their supercruiser designs out.
Um, hmm, uh, Possibly. I mean, the thing is, if they're looking for capital ships, you do have some kind of mini Yamatos during the Yamato design process. Like the lower end, they actually do look at ships with 9 16-inch guns, um,
The
which
lower
are
end.
yeah, which is kind of yeah. Their absolute low end is pretty much what Allied intelligence thought they were building. So I mean, if I was the Japanese, I was absolutely in a bind and I wanted more battleships. And I mean, let's face it, that it's the Japanese. They may just go build another couple of Shikakus or something. But assuming that they did go for gun capital ships, I think their best choice would actually probably be to dig out the 16-inch mini Yamato and go, well, we can build that on a smaller slipway. That'd still
If they
be
did go for,
yeah. I mean, they still. I mean, if they're looking at what mid to late 1930s. A
yeah,
ship with 9 16-inch guns, probably at 55,000 tons with heavy armor and 28 knots, is still going to be more capable on paper than anything anyone else is building, because the only ships with 16-inch guns under construction at that point are going to be the North Carolinas and the South Dakotas. And the mini Yamato would massively out armor the North Carolina. It would significantly out armor the South Dakota, and it would be, not a compact little boy like the poor old South Dakota is.
yeah. The other option
It
is, as
really
they said,
actually is quite fascinating when you go on the preserved US capital ships.
yeah.
If you go on North Carolina or any of the Iowas and you go down the sides, down the gangways, yes, there's a lot of 5-inch 38 twin mounts everywhere, but there is actually space to walk down there. And then you go on Massachusetts or Alabama, and there's literally a walkway that's about this wide. It's not a two-way walkway. It's a one-way walkway, and you better hope you don't take XXL t-shirts because otherwise you ain't getting down there.
And by the way, this is how Drac gets his revenge for the fact that I went to see the submarine at Tallinn and he lost out of it because I haven't been to see any of those ships. So this is how he cruelly tortures me in return.
Mm.
But just for
Mind you,
those people who just think
you
I
did
just done the
stick me
torturing
with
goes
the
one night.
doing the organization for when we ever do a Ship Shape America tour.
Yes, yes, I have.
Although
If we do a ship
that
in
does
American or
that does of course mean
you
I get the
haven't,
option to either torture you by going, well, we're going to visit all the ships I haven't visited yet, which
okay.
means a lot of the smaller stuff and a few of the carriers.
Which I wouldn't say no to because you know
Yeah,
me, I like a nice carrier.
yeah.
I love a carrier, and I like
Or
a
I
small
could turn
ship.
around and go, okay, well, we're going to revisit for me all of these big ships. Which means I'll
That's
be like,
fine.
oh yes, I know my way around here, everybody.
That'd be lovely. I would have a lot of fun with that either way. Also,
Mm.
in the nicest way, I would have a lot of fun with that because I can imagine I could crawl through their build spaces. You know me. Like to go down deep into the ships.
Yeah, and some of the ships will
Oh,
definitely let you do that.
yeah. But no, the thing is, the one we haven't discussed here, what happens in this scenario, the one we haven't discussed is it's what did the Americans do? What do they decide to do? Because they're already building a fair number of ships, so they could just carry on
Mm.
building what they're building. But there's also the scenario where they look at it, go, "Hang on, okay, what's going on here? What's this? What? Why is this suddenly sped up like this? Why is this suddenly happening to us?"
Well, see, I think what the US will do is I don't think they'll build a new class because the British are building the King George V, the Americans are building the North Carolinas. They've already gone through quite a radical change at the last minute to switch the North Carolinas from quad 14s to triple 16s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're really in the position of coming up with yet another design. But if they want something quickly, they do have the shipyard capacity at this stage. I think they just build more North Carolinas because remember historically they do North Carolina and Washington, and then they switch over to 4 South Dakotas, and then they do the 4 Iowas, and they were going to do 6, and they were going to do a bunch of Montanas. In this scenario, they'll probably go, okay, we'll actually have 4 um, North Carolinas.
That would not be a bad thing for them to have. Those are good ships, North
Mm.
Carolinas.
Because
They are good ships.
they've got the they've got the shipyard capacity to do it. They've got the money to do it if they can persuade Congress to shake it loose. And if they've got the pre-existing designs, they can just go, okay, well, we ordered, so many 16-inch 45s, so many twin 5-inch 38s in the battleship configuration for the mounting, bit of heavier protection and so forth. We just want more.
I have to say, I do love the fact that the A style design of the North Carolinas, and I looked up my notes to check it was the case, looks so much like the F3 in
Mm,
design. And if you're American, you've never seen as American, you've never seen the
mm,
F3 design, and if
mm,
anyone's not seen the F3 design, but if you said that's fine because I do realize it's one of those designs which gets a bit lost in history.
mm,
But if you look at the American North Carolina's A design, it's pretty much the same thing. It's an all forward and it's
yeah.
stacked up, A, B, C as super
Well,
firing over the
that's
others.
why my North Carolina design
Mm.
history video is subtitled "The Nelsons That Never Were"
Yeah.
because so much of their early design is looking at an all forward layout in
Mm.
various iterations.
Yeah. They're good ships. They are interesting ships. Okay. So there
Hmm.
is one people we skipped over the Greek vessel to an extent. We did skip over the Greek battlefield hot
Mm,
rod, which is to me that the reason that's got the guns it has, or even they're getting American guns, which the British use very nicely on their monitors, is because the Germans don't have that gun at that point. That's the symptom of the issue. The Germans can build a good ship, but we haven't invested in that tech yet, so we haven't got the gun to offer. So you're going to have to buy guns from America to build them in a German-built ship, and you're going to buy turbines from other countries of these things. The interesting one in that is the Austrians, and I think probably for me, the Erzat Monarch class. They are this class which, how do I put this, have so much potential with them. And if World War One does hold off in any way, shape, or form, then you could be dealing with, so the Royal Navy could have to deploy some really of their really good ships to the Mediterranean to back up the French and the Italians, because neither of them would really have had anything that's just going to match in with those ships, because the Francesco Caracciolo aren't going to match in with them. They have fastened them, yes, but this is going to have 10, 14-inch guns, and frankly, it's going to be a very, very well armed vessel.
Well, I mean, the Greeks are basically taking the same approach they did with the Georgios Avarov of going,
Yeah.
we think these guys do the best hull, we think these guys do the best propulsion systems, these guys do the best guns, etc. So we're just going to order from everybody.
That is the beautiful thing about looking at Greek design. So often does tell you exactly who's doing the best at doing what. And
Hmm.
they build the battlefield hot rod, and I was looking and going, oh, sexy.
Well, I
Also,
mean,
maintenance nightmare, but sexy.
ultimately, to a certain degree, the Greeks are doing exactly what I advocate small navies should do.
Mm.
You are never going to be able to compete with bigger navies in terms of numbers, so don't even try. Don't try and do the same thing that everybody else is doing, but just only one or two instead of five, six, or seven, because that's never going to work. What you do is you spend a little bit money, so you spend like enough to build one and a half standard models of battleships, and instead you just turn around and go, okay, well, for one and a half times the cost, we're going to have the absolute premium ship, because then if we fight someone who's much, much bigger than us, they're going to have to send at least two or three ships instead of just one, which is going to be annoying for them. So they might not do it. And if we fight someone who's roughly on the same level as us, debatable whether the Ottoman Navy is on the same level as the Greeks, given their performance in the 1900s, but there you go. But they can turn around and go, well, actually, they can send one or two of their ships against our really good ship, and we'll probably still win. Well, I mean, which is, again, is exactly what
It's,
happened with the Georgios Avarov, because on paper,
yeah.
the Avarov versus a couple of Brandenburg class pre-dreadnoughts and the Messudae and the various other half complete wrecks that the Ottomans have scraped up out of somewhere. Theoretically, the Greek fleet is massively outnumbered and outgunned, but practically, because Avarov is basically brand new, well maintained, and has the cutting edge in naval systems for the time, even though she's an armored cruiser, she actually manages to send a bunch of pre-dreadnought battleships packing. The
Yes.
interesting thing, of course, is that you've got the two Ottoman ships, which theoretically they were going to get, the what would become Agincourt and Erin. And Agincourt is just all the 12-inch guns, but let's face it, she doesn't have the world's best armor. And the other one, Erin, is essentially a mid-tier British 13.5-inch super dreadnought clone.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, Salamis has same number of guns, but bigger and better protection. So, you know,
Has Yarrow boilers.
mm,
AG steam turbines were eventually selected, but that's because apparently the yard couldn't do a deal to get Parsons.
mm,
Um, 14-inch guns supplied by the Americans, 6-inch guns. I think they were British 6-inch guns. The 3-inch and the 3-inch guns and torpedoes were, I think, were British and German. And then she was going to have, well, a standard sort of almost a 9.8-inch belt at her fixed points of armor.
mm.
She's a decent little ship. She would have been, and I say the little. She's 19,800 tons in standard, but for the time, that isn't particularly massive, but it also isn't particularly bad.
Well, it's a little bit thicker than Agincourt or
Mhm.
Sultan Osman the First Evel, as she would have been called. So, and of course, you have the fact that ultimately, although it might be a little bit thin on the ground, the British battle cruisers, Lion and Tiger, they did kind of demonstrate that at medium to long distance battle ranges, their armor is just enough to protect them from 12-inch gunfire.
Yeah.
It's not pretty, but it does stop it getting through the citadel. So add almost an extra inch to that, and it would mean Salamis would match up really nicely against Agincourt. I mean, Agincourt can deluge her with 12-inch shells, but Salamis is going to have a range and penetration advantage because, yeah, 14-inch guns are going to do quite a number to Agincourt at ranges where Agincourt really can't do all that much to her.
The interesting thing about all this, though, and this I did do when I did a video
Mm.
about Samus, is that, the guy in charge of the selection process for her is Rear Admiral Lionel Grant Tufnell. Now, does that sound like a Greek name to you?
Mm.
No, he's actually the head of the British naval mission to Greece, and he reviews, as their basically chief advisor, the 10 British submissions, the 4 French submissions, the 3 German, the 3 American, the 1 Austrian, and 2 Italian submissions they have for the contracts. And he basically advises and works through what they need to get and make sure it's detected, helps them get what they need to get. And that's, it's also, by the way, here's the other thing, and this was an interesting thing to me. After reviewing the testing
Mm.
of the German armor and the British armor and the American armor and the Italian armor, he gets told that the British won't send their armor over to Germany. They decide to go with a German hull. He then decides to go with his second favorite option for the armor. Do you know who that was? America. He decides Bethlehem Steel
Mm.
has better armor than their German or Italian counterparts offering at this point. And
Yeah, I mean, the
that's
interesting
a
thing.
really interesting. It's
Mm.
it's one of those that if you're interested in looking at a review and comparison
Mm.
process of all these different navies at that point in roughly
Mm.
1912, all these nations their capacities, the Greek program is a really interesting thing to get because it's got
Yeah.
the same people reviewing all the data from all these different navies and what they're offering, and is ranking what they want in order of what they want it from.
I mean, the other interesting, of course, is that compared to Resadaye, which would become Erin, so the only thing Salamis has going for her there is speed,
Mhm.
because she is Resadaye has more armor and more guns, albeit 13.5 versus 14-inch, but she has an extra 2 of them. Uh, Salamis is a bit somewhat smaller. She's about 4,000 tons lighter, but she does have the speed. So although on paper Salamis is kind of in the middle bit of the 3 ships, I have a feeling that given the Ottoman track record of maintaining their ships at that time period, you go back to like Averof versus the Brandenburgs. The Brandenburgs on paper are far more powerful than Averof, but Averof sees off the Brandenburgs because Averof is actually maintained.
Mhm. It is. It is an interesting piece of history. It really is.
Mm.
Those ones. But
The
yeah,
thing I
and
find quite fascinating, though, is to be honest, is that when you look at a lot of the, if you like, export battleships, whether that's the Almirante Torres, Minas Gerais, Rivadavias, Salamis, Agincourt, Riachuelo, and obviously Resadaye, although some of them have roughly contemporaneous armor schemes, like Resadaye, which is essentially King George V with Iron Duke secondary batteries, um, the vast majority of the export battleships all tend to have slightly less than average armor. Because the Germans and the Americans are kind of going like all in on armor. The British armor
Mhm.
is for their capital ships usually about average for the world, but a lot of the export battleships tend to drop 2 or 3 inches of armor in exchange for either getting more firepower or more speed or cutting the size down, which I find really interesting because on the one hand, as I said, you do have this evidence that at least if you're facing 12-inch guns, then you might get away with 9-inch armor if you're at longer ranges. But then as you drift forward, you get this point of like people coming up with 13.5 and 14-inch armed ships for export or bigger, and they're still sticking with that slightly questionable armor choice. It's like it's not with the best one in the world. 9 inches is not going to protect you against a 14 or 15-inch shell.
I think it's because for a lot of the smaller powers, when they're buying them, they're to an
Mm.
extent buying glass cannons. If they buy them with the big guns and the more
Mm.
powerful guns, they represent a bigger threat. Yes, they're not survival, but what damage will they do to you? And they're
Mm.
concentrating on the damage they will do to their opponent's side of the paradigm
Mm.
rather than damage they will themselves survive.
And they're probably
Whereas
also thinking about
if you're Britain and if you're Britain, you're thinking about your fleet being a global fleet and going where you need it to be. So it needs to be both survivable and able to inflict damage. If you're German, you're thinking about, well, in many ways, at a certain point, they start thinking about dominating the North Sea, in which case it's very much a defensive fleet. And the Americans are also very much a defensive fleet, where you're coming to them. They need the armor, they need the firepower, so that they're going to wear you down because they're going to be close to their resupply. You're not, sort of thing.
mm. Well, I think the other thing is that you've, to a certain degree, when you're looking at these smaller navies, to be fair, if you go with 9-inch armor, that's still going to protect you against any pre-dreadnoughts they might have. It's going to protect you against any armored cruisers, protected cruisers. It's going to protect you against like 99% of their fleet. The only thing it's not going to protect you against is potentially the one or two equivalent period dreadnoughts that the other guy might be buying. Um, which it's a strategy, I suppose. If you can wipe out everybody, the rest of the fleet with impunity, I suppose both sides are probably thinking, we'll wipe out the rest of their fleet, and then we'll have all of our fleet to be able to take on the one or two remaining dreadnoughts. Except that both sides are thinking that. At which point it comes down to a
Yeah,
mixture of training and, well, yeah, training and skill.
and maintenance,
Mm.
always maintenance. Yeah, but the Azat monarchs,
Mm.
because we should probably discuss them a little bit because
No, we'll
they are
round out episode 2 with the Erzatz monarchs because
yeah. Yeah, it will be. It's wait, it's a thing to finish off on with the
mm,
Azat monarchs. Before we probably end up with episode 3 at this rate.
mm.
Um,
I mean,
uh,
they're an interesting case because in a lot of ways they're almost like the Nevadas.
they
I mean,
are.
they've got fractionally less armor, but their armor is still creditable. Their gun layout is exactly the same as the Nevadas. The
Mhm.
10, 14-inch guns, one twin for throwing over a triple at each end. They have a slightly heavier secondary battery because they're using the sort of European standard 6-inch or nearest equivalent there on two, with a weirdly almost pre-dreadnought like tertiary battery, um, and obviously the 21 knots, which is the same as a Nevada class. So I mean, I think they're quite interesting. I think they get sold short a little bit sometimes because obviously people are looking at them as, when are these things going to be constructed? They're theoretically due to be constructed in the middle of World War II, and by the time, sorry, World War One. It'd be interesting if
I
the
was going to
Austro-Hungarian
say,
Empire was still around in World War Two.
it would be.
But and I think people are looking at them and going, well, the Nevadas, which they're similar to, the Nevadas are 3 or 4 years ago, at the point that they would have been laid down. And you've got the Bardens and the Revenges and the QEs and everything being laid down. But I think the flip side to that is they're not planning on fighting those ships. And ultimately, let's face it, the Austro-Hungarian naval infrastructure is not big. Um,
It's about securing the Adriatic.
mm. And
It's about.
if they're fighting the Cavours and the Duilios, which are what the Italians are building at the time, then, well, actually, you know, 12 in a bit inches of armor against 12-inch guns, that's actually quite creditable. 10, 14-inch guns, and let's face it, the Italian dreadnoughts are not the world's most heavily protected ships.
No.
That's a good bit of firepower to be sending down range at them. Okay, they're slower than the Italian ships are, but again, the Italians are kind of the ones who really, really like their speed in this period. So for a ship that's designed to contest the Adriatic, I think
With
they're not half bad. The
and with their four
Caraculos, to be fair, are
Tegetos.
much better,
Yes, but I
but
don't.
the Caraculos would be coming along a little bit later.
Also, the Caraculos, because of what they sacrifice for speed, I
Hmm.
think if you find yourself fighting the four Monarchs and the four Tegetos which they would in their
Mm.
sort of period, in a battle line in the Adriatic, I think the Caraculos could find themselves in trouble because they don't have the room for maneuver to use their speed. Now, the Caraculos are very good with their speed. If they've got room for maneuver in the as they did in the west within the Western Basin or the Eastern
Mm.
Basin Mediterranean, great. In the Adriatic, where you don't have that room for maneuver, I think these ships could together as a group would be something which would probably keep the Italian fleet out of the Adriatic, which is a problem for the Italians.
Yeah,
Because
or at least it would force the Italians to play a rather interesting game, because if you form a death blob or a battle line and you sail out into the Adriatic to try to do Ancona bombardment too, then the Italians would be. I mean, the Italians would have a slight numerical superiority, assuming that they've got everything
Mhm.
online. But the Italians would be forced, that, as you said, it's like if they get in a straight up battle line engagement, the Italians could be taking damage at a faster rate, which means that the Italians would probably have to adopt a strategy of trying to use their superior battle line speed to try and engage part of the Austro-Hungarian battle line, or essentially do hit and run attacks and damage and pick off ships. Which, yeah, that might work over time, but if the Austro-Hungarian effort is we go from Pola to the eastern Italian coast, we shoot stuff, we come back again, there might not be the time to do that. And of course, during all of that, you are running a bit of a risk of, yes, even hit and run attacks might work, but all it takes is one bad salvo for you, good, obviously a good salvo for the Austro-Hungarians, and now you're the one with the crippled ship that is about to be mobbed, or you
Let's
have
be
to
honest,
tow away.
The
And
Austro-Hungarians have good fire control. This is
mm,
the thing. That's what the,
yeah,
the, the Greeks are the one. That's the point. The
because
Greeks
they fixed
go
the
for the
Takeoff
Austro-Hungarian
turrets
fire
after
control.
Ancona.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have the problems with ventilation during the Ancona bombardment, but missions, but they fixed those afterwards. And ultimately, you again, it's a matter of playing the objective.
Mm.
If the Italians take a ship or two badly hit and have to drop out of line to protect them, well, as far as the Austro-Hungarians are concerned, yeah, sure, they'd like Battle of Lissa too, but if their objective is go over to Italy, shoot stuff, come back again, if crippling a couple of Italian ships to force them to fall back is what allows them to bring their fleet back to Poland mostly undamaged, that's fine. Because at the end of the day, they've managed
That's
to
a
achieve something.
victory. That's
They've
a
achieved their
victory.
bombardment. Yeah.
Mm. Well, not just they've done the bombardment, they've also crippled some Italian battleships. That's
Mm,
something they can shout about. You know.
mm.
And it just means next time they come up, the Italians have to be even more worried because they no longer have the numerical advantage. And that's when you can really start to get some interesting things put over. But no, no, I think that's a good place to end this episode.
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if we end up doing another one because there are more for us to discuss. There are a
Yeah,
lot more
we
for
kind of
us
got
to.
diverted off a little bit into 1930s battleship design, but yeah,
You know,
it happens.
it happens. We did get adverted off, but that's because, to be honest, thanks to the treaties, I would say the design gets frozen far more than it would have done if they'd had the building.
Mm.
If the treaties had been a limited building rather than a no building clause, then I think the battleships you would have by the time you get to World War II be very different. Very, very different in how they'd have
Mm.
evolved. Because you think about it, if you have a scenario whereby, let's say, Britain and America are allowed to build 5 in any 5-year period,
Mm.
Japan's allowed to build 3, and Italy and France are allowed to build 3. Well, let's say 3 in every 10-year period, or 4 in every 5 in every 10-year period, or something like that. Then you suddenly have a very different scenario going on where for the British, for the Italians, and what they're building is going to change because they're going to
I've
keep
just
building,
I've just thought
changing
of
those things.
something that could be a rather interesting episode 3 dash spin-off episode.
Yes.
So
Okay.
we've both got Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts.
Yes.
It's now in its final form. There's not going to be any further
Yeah.
updates in its extra turn.
Yeah.
What we could do, possibly as a live, maybe, would be to beforehand shortlist a bunch of scenarios like we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Like, what if Britain had to build a battleship now? What if the States had to build a battleship then? What if France was
Yeah.
building a ship with appropriate infrastructure, etc.? So we have our short list of scenarios and the years, and it's obviously not going to be perfect because ultimately UAD is a game.
Yes.
But we could then go, split screen like this, live stream, and then go, okay, we have our brief. We have, I don't know, let's say 10 minutes or something like that. And then
We build it.
we each go into UAD and we build what we think that nation would do at that time, or what we think they should have done. Um, and obviously everyone can see what we're building. We'll hopefully be focused on what we're doing, not what the other person is doing. And then at the end of of that, let's say 10-minute timer, we can compare and contrast what we've done.
Sounds like a fun one to me. That sounds like a fun one to me. Shall we say what these two the first two parts are going to come out as premieres?
Mm-hmm.
Well, shall we say also as a thing for that third part, we'll do it A if people would like us to, and B have them comment below on the part two with what they'd
Mm-hmm.
like us to do. So there's scenarios
Yes.
they'd like us to do. So we'll sit there and we'll have a look through those scenarios.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
we'll do the third part. We will do it live because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more fun for everyone if we do it live. I'm not sure how we can do it. We'll do that over the channels, but we'll work out a way we can do it over the channels
Mm-hmm.
and do it live.
Yeah. Well, one of us can stream it. Probably. Yeah. Well, actually, because in order
Well,
to
actually, what we could do
maximize the
is
viewership,
you could
we,
stream it
we
on YouTube and I could stream it on Twitch.
yeah, we could do that. Or I was thinking one person streams it to get so that the audience is all in one place, because otherwise
Yeah,
we have to be managing multiple chats. So if you stream it, but then once it's done, you can send me the VOD, and then I can upload it into my
yeah,
collaborations playlist as well.
sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
sounds
Okay.
good. I hope everyone likes that idea. And as I said, comment
Cool.
below. And I'll end the recording. Thank you as always.
And then bye.
So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. And as we said in the video, if you would like a part 3 with us going through as a new AD and us sharing screens the whole time, so probably would be a Discord share with 4 screens, so there'd be 2 shared screens and us 2 chatting to each other. Because I think that works probably better than the other option. Potentially we go with the other option. We'll have a look into it. If you're interested, and it'll be literally us trying to design ships to the challenges you're setting in the chat, and talking away and answering them, and basically going how we would have solved problems, what the ships we would have built would have been. It is interesting. It's an interesting opportunity, and it will be a lot of fun to do if you're all interested. And that's not even a backers thing, and some of the backers stuff we've got. And I will cover this in this stuff is pretty darn cool. There is going to be I'm playing of a specific computer game, Crusader Kings 3 All Under the Sun. John Bull is going to teach me. Okay, Gareth the Brit is going to teach me how to play All Under the Sun, and probably Crusader Kings 3 better than I currently do. Because currently I play it okay, but I would call myself a visiting player. With UAD, I will quite happily teach people how to play it. With Crusader Kings 3, it's something I play occasionally to relax, not that I play to know stuff. I am better in Anno 1800 than I am in Crusader Kings 3, and I am very much a visitor in Anno 1800. I enjoy it, just not a specialist, not an expert. But as we all know, Gareth the Brit really is. He really, really is. And so the plan is that he'll teach me how to play it, and then together we will host a multiplayer event for lots of people to be part of if they wish to, and people to watch if they wish to. So it'll be a fun thing to do. There are going to be challenge coins. This time there are going to be designs put out to people who have joined it, and they'll be allowed to pick it, and so that the design will be chosen by the people who have, because, and this is, I'm going to be honest, this is to make my life easier. Just in case, because we are all perfectionists and we will spend hours, days, weeks, months debating which design to choose. This time I've come up with a great and cunning idea. We will all put together the designs we want, and then we'll put them to you to choose. But with that being said, thank you. Thank you for making all this possible, and I'd really like to hear whether you would like the part 3, which could potentially come from this. Thank you very much, and take care.